aberdeenshire.gov.uk and look for a Ukraine link at the footer of the home page. There have been, however, some glimmers of good news amidst the anxiety and sadness of recent weeks. Our congratulations to Aberdeenshire's Neil Simpson and his brother Andrew, who have made history earlier this week, winning gold at the Paralympic Winter Games in Beijing. Neil, who is just 20, won the men's Super G Vision Impaired Sky Race with Andrew as his guide. This, colleagues, is an astonishing achievement for the Bankery brothers, and well done from all of us. Finally, the nominations phase of Inspiring Aberdeenshire 2022 has just opened, and being one of the judges for these awards is the highlight of my year. And this year we want to hear about anyone who supported their community in times of need, be that COVID, storms, or just because that is what they do. And I encourage you, colleagues, all to nominate one of your everyday heroes. Thank you very much. Please note that the meeting is being streamed live and the recording will be published online for public viewing after the meeting. Can all attendees mute their microphones when not speaking and activate their cameras and microphones where possible when invited to speak? Please do not come in during items unless I invite you to do so. If members wish to speak on any point, please notify me via the instant message function in the Skype meeting invite, or if you have dialed in to the meeting via telephone, please state your name and request to speak. I will then bring you in at the appropriate moment. Please do not use the instant message facility in the Skype meeting for any other messages, as these may appear in the live stream and recording of the meeting. If any members lose connection during the meeting, please take action to rejoin the meeting yourself, failing which alert the committee officer by a separate Skype instant message, if possible. If you have any technical issues of support, will be available for an IT officer during the meeting. I will now ask the clerk to take the sederant for today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Councillor Agnew. Councillor Aitchison.
Present.
Councillor Allen. Councillor Argyle.
Good morning, Anne. I'm here.
Councillor Bailey.
Present.
Councillor Beagrie.
Present.
Councillor Berry.
Present.
Councillor Buse. Councillor Blackett.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, Anne.
Morning. Councillor Bruce.
Present.
Councillor Alan Buchan.
Present.
Councillor Charles Buchan.
I'm here now.
Thank you. Councillor Marion Buchan.
Present.
Councillor Calder.
Present.
Councillor Carr.
I'm here. Morning.
Councillor Cassie.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Good morning.
Morning. Councillor Davidson.
Good morning.
Morning. Councillor Dickinson.
Present. Good morning.
Morning. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Durno.
Good morning, I'm here.
Morning. Thank you. Councillor Everson.
Present.
Councillor Ewanson.
Right, text on a dark strip.
Present.
Councillor Findlater.
I am here.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Forsyth.
Present.
Councillor Gibb.
Here.
Councillor Gifford.
I'm here. Morning.
Morning. Councillor Harper.
Present. Morning.
Morning. Councillor Hassan.
Present.
Thank you. Provost Howitson.
Present.
Councillor Hutchison.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. I've got apologies from Councillors Ingram and Ingleby. Councillor Johnston.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Keating.
Present.
Councillor Kill.
Present.
Councillor Cloppert.
Present.
I have an apology from Councillor Latham. Councillor Leslie. Councillor Launchy.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor Mayor.
Present.
Councillor McAllister.
Present.
Councillor McHale.
Present.
I have an apology from Councillor McKelvey. Councillor Mollison.
I'm here.
Councillor Owen.
Present.
Councillor Partridge. Councillor Petrie.
I'm here.
Councillor Pike.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Powell.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
Councillor Reynolds.
Present.
I have an apology from Councillor Robertson. Councillor Ross.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Roy.
Present.
Councillor Simpson.
Present.
Councillor Hazel Smith.
Present.
Councillor Norman Smith.
Present.
Councillor Stephen Smith.
Here.
Councillor Stirling.
Present.
Councillor Sutherland.
Present.
Councillor Taylor.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Topping.
Here.
Councillor Walker.
Present.
Councillor Wallace.
Present.
Councillor White.
Present.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. And Councillor Withy.
Here.
Thank you. Provost, I'm just come back to those members who didn't respond.
Yes,
Councillor
sure.
Agnew. Councillor Agnew. Councillor Allen.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Buse. Councillor Duncan. I can see you've messaged in the message bar, Councillor Duncan, but I can't hear you. Councillor Leslie. Councillor Partridge. We have 60 members present, Provost. Thank you.
60. Okay, thank you very much. Do members have any interest to declare? And if so, indicate now using the instant message and I will bring you in. No,
Councillor Everson is asking to come in, Provost.
right. I don't see it in this. Yes, okay.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I have two declarations of transparency to make in relation to the revenue budget paper. Firstly, I am President of COSLA, and secondly, I'm a member of Unite the Union. I've applied the objective test in both cases, and I will be staying and taking part in the meeting for that item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Everson. Thank you. Any other indications? No. Okay. Item 2 is statement on equalities. Members are requested to agree to the equalities statement. If you do not agree, please indicate via the instant message now, and I will bring you in. Okay, I see that. Okay, item 3 is the medium-term financial strategy. This will be introduced by the Head of Finance, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Provost. So the aim of the medium-term financial strategy is to pull together in one place all known factors affecting the financial position and sustainability of the Council over the medium term. Whilst it's important for setting this year's budget, it's equally important to provide a focus for financial planning over the next few years. This gives us a reasonable timescale to plan and consider how to address the financial challenges ahead. Based on the current modelling, the Council could be facing a possible funding gap of 48 million over the next few years. However, as we know, there will continue to be significant fluctuations in these assumptions, and this strategy gives examples of the possible impacts on changes to inflation, pay awards, Scottish Government funding and income. And in readiness to address the future funding gap, several efficiency initiatives have been supported by the strategic leadership team. These include a staff savings engagement programme, a chief officer's change programme and service design, and 3 cross-council transformation themes have been launched. Finally, Provost, if I could draw elected members' attention to paragraph 3.28 of the medium-term financial strategy, in which I've stated that there will only be costs associated with the carbon budget. Of course, there may be some associated financial savings as a result of the carbon budget, and this should have been reflected in the strategy. Happy to take any questions, Provost.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Provost. Could I just confirm the medium-term financial strategy paper will include various minor changes which would be part of effectively the revenue budget setting process. Is it appropriate, therefore, to move changes to the MTFS proposal as it's printed in order to make sure that all of the figures across the piece balance?
Yep. Head of Finance.
Yes, through you,
Yes.
Provost. Yes, Councillor Johnston, if there were any significant changes as a result of the council meeting today, then we would recast the medium-term financial strategy to ensure the correct figures were reflected within it.
Okay,
Thank you.
Provost, just to confirm then that the amendments which we would have would be only relatively minor, so the decision on the MTFS would not affect whether those would be implemented if we were proposing them as part of the revenue budget. Is that okay? So in other words, we do not need to move an amendment at this particular point. Is that what you're saying?
Head of Finance, please.
No, Councillor Johnston, I wouldn't anticipate you moving an amendment at this within this particular paper.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Leader of the Council, please.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to set out the Council's medium-term financial strategy for the next 5 years. Over the next few hours, this Council will discuss and debate a number of different budgets. Our revenue budget, capital, reserves and carbon, each important in their own right. How these all sit together as a framework is critical to the financial well-being of Aberdeenshire Council. And it has become our custom in recent years to bring forward a report which sets out how we will use funding in the medium term to support our council priorities. We all recognise that it is impossible to run an organisation with financial influence of over £1 billion a year without planning over many years. The medium-term financial strategy provides a financial forecast over a rolling 5-year timeframe, identifying the funding gaps and informing the budget setting process. As part of this process, we must also be very aware of the context in which we're operating. The last few years have seen challenges, the like we could not have predicted. The pandemic has changed our priorities, required us to provide support to communities and work in a completely new way. We are now experiencing the very real impact of the increased cost of living, and that impacts on the council as well as on our residents. Our energy costs alone are expected to cost an additional £3.5 million in 2022-23. Based on current forecasts, as set out in the paper, we expect a funding gap of over £48 million over the next 5 years. So it is the purpose of the medium-term financial strategy to look ahead, to prompt us to take action now to address the funding shortfall, to make changes to the way we deliver our services, always finding that balance between delivering services that our residents need within a budget that is coming under increasing pressure. And so our mission is to keep the plate spinning, to innovate, to try new ways of achieving the best outcomes, and to ensure our communities continue to get the vital local services they need. As part of the budget process, we review everything, every line of spend, be that in our revenue, capital or reserves. We look across all our budgets to ensure we continue to deliver the best value for money. Over a number of years, we've asked the public for their views on what can change and how we can make savings this year. This year we focused on our workforce, those closest to the day-to-day activity, to identify savings through the Every Voice Counts campaign. We're receiving new ideas every day for saving suggestions, and these are being worked through. We are committed to this activity. It doesn't matter if the saving is £10 or £10,000, because every penny will make a difference. We're also exploring cross-council themes of mobility, ways of working and commercialisation to challenge how we've done things in the past, looking for improvements in how these areas are delivered, along with identifying savings. There are a number of reports on today's agenda which we will review in detail, and I welcome the medium-term financial strategy to provide that important context for the wider debate we will have today. I commend this report to the Council, move the recommendation and seek a seconder. Thank you, Provost.
Provost, you have your mute on. We can't hear you at the moment.
Yeah, sorry. Do you have a seconder, please?
Yes, indeed, Provost.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Gile. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning to you, and good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to second this report. It is extremely helpful and prudent to look ahead over the next few years and to forecast the likely impact of rising costs on the Council's finances. I'll draw members' attention to Appendix 2 of the report, which sets out the budget assumptions, and that alone is pretty grim reading. The leader referred to the rising energy costs, but beyond that, members will also see general inflation, increased national insurance contributions, staff costs, interest rates. All of these factors make budgeting particularly challenging at the moment. And this provides the context for the next few reports and demonstrates the scale of the challenge we are facing. We have a collective responsibility to balance the books, not just for next year, but for years to come. At the same time, we have a vital role in supporting communities across Aberdeenshire to flourish and prosper. We are a council that has a good track record of sound financial management and delivering good local services. I'm confident that once again we will rise to that challenge. We will today set a clear direction, make difficult decisions where we need to, innovate and change services to meet future needs. And I commend this report to members. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Gile. Councillor Petrie, please.
Thank you, Provost. Forward planning is vital for the effective and responsible financial management of councils, and so I welcome the paper before us today. Through our committee work, we keep a regular eye on the budgets for the current financial year, but it's equally as important for the reasons mentioned that we also have an eye on the budget forecast for future years. And as the council leader has mentioned, we have found ourselves in unanticipated financial circumstances. I think we can probably all agree that we would prefer multi-year settlements and the additional planning ability that this would allow us. Unfortunately, that requires our national parliaments to also do this, and there's been no commitment to that as yet. Therefore, the best way to allow us to plan ahead is through the MTFS process, and it's reassuring to receive this paper annually, and our thanks from the partnership to the officers for their work on this throughout the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other indication at this point in time.
Thomas, I would like to just make a brief comment, if I may.
Yes.
Yes, thank
Yes.
you. And as my colleague Councillor Johnston indicated, we're not moving an amendment, and I entirely agree with the points about the necessity for taking a medium and longer term view of the council's finances. It's essential for an organisation of this kind that we do that. I would just make a couple of brief comments about it. Firstly, the principles of the MTFS. One of the principles, apparently, is that we will maintain a general reserve of 9 million to cover any major unforeseen expenditure. I'm not sure I would elevate that to a principle, and I have to say I think it's an issue that the council might wish to revisit. As the council leader alluded to, the last few years have seen rainy days in an extreme form. The council has been through, frankly, a great trauma, as indeed has the rest of Aberdeenshire society and indeed the whole world in respect of COVID. And we never looked like running out of money. And if we never look like running out of money in a situation as bad as that, I have to wonder what on earth could happen that would require us to have 9 million. So I'll just leave it sticking to the wall, but I think it's something that the council could revisit at some point. It is perhaps unnecessarily cautious. The other point I would just like to make is that there are some underlying assumptions that are quite rightly, for reasons of transparency, set out. So the council has assumed a flat cash position regarding the Scottish Government general funding. That seems to me a reasonable assumption, but we've also assumed that the council tax and increase and other income would only increase by 3%. And the corollary of those two assumptions is potentially a very large funding gap. Now, it's all clear for everybody to see, which is good, but at the same time, the funding gap clearly is potentially horrifying. And if we were to have a flat cash settlement ongoing, and if we were to only have a 3% increase in our income from the council tax and other sources, we would be cutting services year on year on year, and I think that is a horrifying prospect. So I don't think we should have a medium-term financial strategy that flags up, as it were, our preparedness to do that. If we're going to assume a flat cash settlement from the government, we should show an increase in our council tax to maintain our services. And that would concentrate minds. It would show people perfectly clearly what the consequences are. I think the vast majority of colleagues in the chamber agree that a fundamental reform of local government funding is required. It's certainly been my view for a very long time. It tends to be the view of all parties when in opposition, but it is a view they do not carry out when they are in government. But we do need that, and I have to say I don't think it's smart of the council to put forward a set of assumptions whereby the circle is squared by cutting services. I would show an increase in council tax that would maintain services, and clearly then if the Scottish Government, of whichever party is in power in the day, chooses to increase our grant, we can make up for that by correspondingly reducing council tax or whatever form of funding follows it. But I mean, whilst it's all perfectly transparent, there are some assumptions in there that I don't think are necessarily helpful in the wider debate of local government funding, where at the moment, as it were, we will be largely making good by cutting services, and that's not where I think we should be going.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. I don't see any other expressions, so can we agree with recommendations as on page 4 of your report, please?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We can move on, please, to item 4, which is the revenue budget 2022-2027. And call the leader of the council, please.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, members of the council, I am pleased to present the administration's budget for the next year, 2022 to 2023. It is a responsibility I know we all take very seriously as we set out our spending priorities for the year ahead. The revenue budget covers our day-to-day spending and totals just over £660 million for 22-23. That's a huge investment in jobs and services for the direct benefit of our communities. But whilst that sounds like a lot of money, and it is, we must also recognise the demands on the budget and what we're expected and required to provide. We spend around £2.3 million every day on delivering a range of services to our residents, learning and development. And so I start my introduction to this report by setting out the reality of our current position. We have faced unprecedented challenges over the last 2 years, as the pandemic required us to shift our focus, change or stop services, and severely impacted our ability to generate income. Over recent months, Aberdeenshire has been battered by storms, which saw infrastructure like roads, telecommunications and power interrupted for days. Again, teams stepped up to provide practical support and help communities get back on their feet. But all this impacts on our day-to-day activity and has a direct impact on our budget. Add to that the increasing costs of inflation, staff costs, energy prices, and the employer's national contribution to insurance. The impact on local councils is significant. It should also be noted that once again, Aberdeenshire is not getting our fair share. This year we are getting 92.1% of the average settlement per head of population, 4th from bottom of the table. If we were to get just the average, we would be £44.608 million better off this year, or more than £122,000 better off every single day. Provost, 2 weeks ago in my council tax speech, I referred to the predicted 7.5% inflation we can expect. That prediction has since increased to over 8%. I also referred to the Scotland-wide Forbes funding gap of over £250 million. These were the headline figures. More detail can today be seen in our papers at Appendix 3. As we know, the UK government has increased national insurance payments to boost the NHS and fund improved social care. The Barnett consequences of this extra funding will of course come to Scotland, offering the opportunity for increased investment in patient care here. This does mean that employer national insurance contributions rise as well, in our case by some £3.378 million. This was recognised by the UK government, who have recompensed English councils for this. Again, the Barnett consequences of this extra funding have come north, but that money seems to have got stuck in Edinburgh, Provost, and hasn't so far made it as far as the Scottish councils, leaving us with the bill. I also spoke previously of the anticipated £3.5 million rise in the council's energy costs. Officers across the council have reviewed their budget positions, looking at the pressures, at the rising costs they are experiencing and the demand on services. We begin this process by acknowledging that if we deliver everything we want to deliver, be that government expectations or responses to local need, we were out of balance by nearly £24 million. As Appendix 3 shows us, the increase in council tax and the later additional funding reduces this out of balance position to £14.644 million. Today, I will set out how we intend to address that out of balance position and how we will use our considerable investment in local services to continue to support our communities and to achieve the best outcomes possible. Funding for local government comes to us in different ways. The largest proportion comes from the Scottish Government settlement, with the remainder coming from council tax and income generation. In agreeing the Scottish Government funding package, we are required to make certain commitments. For 2022-23, those commitments include an extra £7.2 million on additional teachers and £15.8 million additional funding to go directly to the Aberdeenshire Health and Social Partnership to support delivery of the real living wage and care at home. I can confirm that we will deliver on these asks of government, and our budget is predicated on those commitments being delivered. As I've mentioned, it was only 2 weeks ago that we met to agree the council tax rise of 3%, and that was the first step in addressing the initial budget gap. Councils provide universal services that provide the foundations for our communities to prosper. But with our costs increasing significantly and government grants simply not keeping pace with demand, there is no option but to ask our residents to pay a little more to support their local services. As I said at the time, I appreciate that this comes at a time when everyone is feeling the pressure of rising costs. It is a well below inflationary rise, and we will do everything we can to reduce costs and protect services as far as we can to limit the impact for residents. The council tax rise, though, won't fill the gap by quite some margin. 3% will generate around £3.76 million, but it will go some way to supporting the continuation of vital local services. Following strong representations by COSLA, we have also received an additional £5.5 million from the Scottish Government. I must stress that this is one-off funding, but is very welcome and also goes some way to help to bridge the funding gap we have for this year. But as I've said, this still leaves a shortfall of £14.644 million. So there is no choice. There are a number of corporate and directorate savings which we will also have to take, and these are being shared now. I'll just wait until they appear, Provost.
Yes, thank you.
I hope you can see that on the screen now, Provost, and we've also emailed them round all members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Peter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As a council, we have taken the opportunity to allocate money to reserves over the past few years. We don't use these without careful consideration, but the challenges we have faced over the past few years have severely limited our ability to generate efficiencies and maximise income generation. So it feels an appropriate time to make use of a relatively small proportion of that money. Indeed, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance has publicly said that we should do so. We propose to use £701,000 from the additional Scottish Government Monies Reserve, £700,000 from the Supporting Council Priorities Reserve, and £774,000 from the Pay Reserve from this current concluding financial year, £1.342 million from the Recovery and Resilience Fund, £700,000 from the Infrastructure Fund Reserve. This will be used for its intended purpose. This will leave our reserves in a healthy position, and I will say more about this in a later paper. All this leaves us with our core budgets covered and a bit extra left over, which we can use to invest in areas of real importance for our residents. 0.5% of the council tax will generate an additional £13 million in borrowing, which goes towards our infrastructure fund. More on that in the capital plan report. But I know the significant investment we plan to make on bridges, roads and other projects will be widely welcomed by our communities as we seek to strengthen connections between our settlements. We also recognise the need to do more on sustainability. Aberdeenshire Council was the first council in Scotland to set a carbon budget. In May, we set aside £100,000 to accelerate the work on meeting our emissions targets by 2030 and 2045. The Sustainability Committee have agreed a route map which set out our path to achieve reduced emissions, which includes a range of projects. We are setting aside £500,000 from reserves to enable the feasibility work to begin and provide us with the information we need to progress this important work at pace. This is the full amount requested in that sustainability report. We will hear more later from Councillor Taylor, the chair of that committee. We've been listening very carefully to our communities and have a good understanding of what matters most to them. They appreciate and want to see investment in their localities. They want investment in our open spaces, so they look cared for. I'm pleased to announce today one-off funding of £1 million for our environment and infrastructure service to invest in our parks and open spaces, burial grounds, and on road safety initiatives. Our work has continued without interruption over the past 2 years, and the pandemic has provided us with some extremely valuable lessons, which are shaping our future ways of working. Virtual meetings have become accepted by us all as an efficient way of working. As we move out of the pandemic and restrictions are lifted, we will adopt a more hybrid style of working, making the most of technology to ensure we spend our time in the most efficient way, meeting in person when needed, but conducting business largely using digital means. I've spoken today about the important role of our communities. We simply could not have achieved what we have through the pandemic and the storms without their resilience and support. This is an excellent basis to continue to build on, to give them a louder voice in how we shape services in the future. This council has successfully undertaken elements of participatory budgeting for some years, such as the Your Voice, Your Choice activities. But now we will commit to exceeding the target of 1% of our revenue budget to be agreed through participatory budgeting in 22-23. We will put up the following budgets for participatory budgeting. The Live Life Aberdeenshire Stonehaven leisure facilities of £1.8 million, the participation elements of which are already underway. We will add to that the Parks and Open Spaces budget of £3.8 million, the Public Conveniences budget of £730,000. These will be done via devolving matters to the areas to facilitate local community participation. There is also a great deal of ongoing work in pupil equity funding, which is devolved through schools, but absolutely meets the criteria for participatory budgeting. This is a strong commitment to participatory budgeting and to build on previous activities to ensure our communities continue to have a strong voice, so they feel able to influence the decisions that will affect them locally. These plans mean that we will reach around 1.5% of our budget being via participatory budgeting, some 50% more than we have been required to. We have all previously acknowledged the work of our teams who have continued to deliver the highest quality services over the last 12 months. They are truly remarkable, from supporting our communities during the pandemic, operating services in different ways, supporting the vaccination programme, to helping communities during the storms. We saw thousands of homes left without power or mobile signal, all whilst juggling the day-to-day priorities. I'm going to take this opportunity to once again reflect on their efforts They continue to show resilience in whatever is asked of them, and we simply cannot take that for granted. Once again, Provost, the administration's proposals balance the budget without the need for any compulsory job losses. We've also seen fantastic support from our communities. They've shown resilience and true grit in helping themselves and each other during this past year, and I must acknowledge their efforts. From Storm Arwen in November through to other storms during January and February, it's been a difficult time for many, but I believe it's made us stronger as a community. We've learned lessons and we've improved as we go. But what's critical is that true spirit of partnership and cooperation that we've seen right across Aberdeenshire. Thank you so much for all you've done and all you continue to do. In relation to the work of Business Services Committee, this budget provides a clear means by which our priorities can be taken forward. Estate modernisation is one of the Council's priorities. This budget enables us to fund and deliver a very ambitious capital programme that will help us achieve that priority. I will say more on the capital programme later when we get to that item. Furthermore, we have recognised that ongoing maintenance of our existing buildings and assets remain hugely important, and this budget reinforces that. Another one of our priorities is delivering our digital strategy. We very much have customers at the heart of that, and whilst we have opportunities to modernise and be more efficient in our approach, it is about enhancing the ways in which we interact with residents and customers. We want to make sure our approach continues to be an inclusive one. We look forward to updates on progress during the year. Finally, we know that business service supports the work of the whole Council. This budget finds the balance between securing efficiencies in how we deliver services whilst retaining the ability and capacity to support service delivery. The last year has shown us the importance of having effective, dedicated teams that also have the ability and agility to take on new challenges, whether that be redesigning services, taking on new responsibilities, to support our partners in the NHS, or responding to weather emergencies. It's entirely possible that we will continue to face new challenges in the coming months, and I'm sure that if so, we will respond as well then as we have done over recent years. As I come to the conclusion of this budget speech, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the finance team and the directors and their teams who have spent so much time and hard work engaging with the various councillor groups and providing their advice and expertise. Provost, I would now like to propose that we accept the administration's budget and the recommendations on the paper, and I seek a seconder.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Have your seconder, please?
Yes, indeed, Provost.
Thank you.
Thank you. Provost, I'm very happy to second the Leader of the Council, and I endorse the remarks he's made, and certainly would echo the Leader's thanks to Mary and the finance team for the huge amount of work they've done to get this budget pulled together. And I fully support the budget that the administration is putting forward today. It has been said, and indeed I may have said it myself, that the past is a foreign country where they do things differently. It's also true that the future is a closed book, and that's probably just as well. In that context, I was reflecting on the past couple of years, back to 2020, when most of us were in the council chamber for the budget meeting, little knowing the full extent of what was around the corner. Or in 2021, when we spoke on what had been and speculated on what was to come. And so today, in 2022, where we have to face a combination of circumstances, environmental, political and geopolitical, financial, to say nothing of a tragic war in Europe. To this mix, we must add some of the foreseen but denied consequences of past decisions taken, making a combination which could cause, Provost, thy knotted and combined locks to part and each particular hair to stand on end like quills upon the fretful porpentine. The focus of the administration has always been on Aberdeenshire, and in this incredibly challenging environment, our focus is even sharper. Whatever happens in Edinburgh or London, whatever discourse flies back and forth, we must protect and enhance the services which we provide to our residents, to our businesses, and to the people who visit this wonderful part of Scotland. We must protect the vulnerable, continue to build the recovery from COVID, face up to the challenges of storm and flood, educate our children, deliver the best possible services to all. We must support our workforce. And importantly, we have to balance public expectation with what is a fairly grim reality. And this budget sets out to do just that. The judicious use of our reserves means that we can protect services. And if this is not a rainy day, I don't know what a rainy day is going to look like. We've had to make we've had to make savings. The continued squeeze on our budget makes this inevitable, but we are also investing, particularly in those services that are seen as most vital by our residents. The demand for services did not diminish in this difficult situation, far from it. Our response must therefore be to be even better, to be more efficient, more effective in the design and delivery of services, but also human and empathetic in our approach. Provost, I would like to make a few remarks about environment and infrastructure services, beginning with a heartfelt thank you to every single member of staff within the service for everything that you have done through these massively challenging times. We know the impact of COVID-19 upon the Council's financial position has been significant, and it has affected service delivery in many areas. Recent storms, Arwen, Malik and Corrie, have had their impacts too. Environment and infrastructure services have seen considerable change, but has adapted and reconfigured service delivery in order to continue to deliver vital services to our communities. The service was able to deliver a comprehensive roads maintenance programme despite the pandemic, and this saw the overall condition of the Council's road network improve. But it has not been easy. With Brent crude at $128 yesterday and likely to rise further, and with inflation a real concern, we will have to work even harder to meet the challenges. This budget will give a secure financial basis to the work of continuing to develop new and more effective ways of working, be that for waste services, whose performance this year has been excellent, roads, landscape services, planning and economic development. This administration has invested very significant additional funding into EIS, not just the £5 million into road maintenance or the infrastructure fund allocation to roads and bridges, but the additional £500,000 into landscape services, which we announced back in June. That positive approach remains for 22-23, and I welcome the extra funding for 22-23 into the service. Into the service it has been my privilege to lead politically for almost all of the past 14 years. Provost, we have set an ambitious yet realistic course for environment and infrastructure services, not only for 22-23 but for the years thereafter. And we have matched that ambition with funding while absolutely recognising the huge challenges we face. Provost, thank you very much, and I commend this budget to the Council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gile. A very learned statement, I must say. Thank you. Councillor Johnston, please.
Thank you, Provost. I'll just try to get my video to work.
You're making an amendment.
Yes, I wish to make an amendment.
Okay.
Give me a moment, one moment. Thank you. I think I would start my video. Sorry, apologies. Okay. Could I ask if the budget proposal would actually just be circulated now? There's no need for it to wait. I think I should start off by thanking those officers who have been able to support us in the construction of our budget. Thanks to Mr. Mitchell and indeed to Mary Beattie, the head of service. I would, looking back over the processes, we still have an issue with the way in which we do budgets, but in effect what we have here is a budget as we've just had described, in a crisis situation. It's a crisis not for but so specifically for the budget this year, but a crisis of what we're looking at in the years to come. At this particular point, I just make mention of the item which appears at the bottom, which is the Local Authority Economic Recovery Fund. This was a very last minute item in a funding letter, it will make no difference to the bottom lines of any of the budgets which we are debating here today. I would expect that the proposals in this would be that we would consider this carefully, examine all of the options that this proposal of money from central government for distribution to our citizens as effectively as a grant award. We should seek those examine all the options, seek proposals, evaluate them and bring them back to the council. So, but this is the point, late allocations does not affect the bottom line. So here we have, back to our particular point, it is a relatively simple budget that we're proposing. It is not, we accept that much of the expenditure that we're likely to make in this current year is going to have to be tweaked, moved, to take in account of all of the changes which are on their way. We know that there are going to be spending pressures. We know that there are going to be significant pressures because of climate change, the economy, and the rest. But let's make the point, which I think has been made plenty of times before, that a budget is in fact just the expression in financial terms of our political priorities. So what are our political priorities? You can see from our proposals, our priorities, I think, are going to be ones of investment. What are the things which would actually deliver for the citizens in Aberdeenshire? And for us, education remains one of the most significant items, and therefore we make no apologies for highlighting that particular proposal. Essentially, our proposal is that during the course of the budget setting, it became evident that we were looking back in order to set the current council tax rise. That if we look back for CPI and RPI as to what our forecasts of the way in which inflation would operate, then we were likely to come up short. Now, even since the budget setting process where we actually set the council rate effectively, even since then, we know of major changes which will happen in our economy. We know of clearly the Ukraine situation will affect international oil prices, gas prices, and many of the forecasts as we go forward. What would be the real rate of inflation? Well, perhaps your guess would be as good as mine, but it is definitely not 3%, and it is considerably more than that. In fact, it may not even be the amount that we proposed at the particular time, but it was very close to one of the best guesses. On that basis, we can see that we need to invest in our public services in order to overcome some of these difficulties that we have, huge difficulties. To be able to make that investment, to be able to see our way through the crisis that we're in, requires us, in effect, to maintain the expenditure that we're doing on the services that we deliver. We need to change some of those services, but we do that constantly throughout the year. But we need to make sure that the financial base of this authority remains firm. Therefore, in effect, what we've done, and it appears that the administration have done relatively similarly, is to look carefully at the reserves, because there needs to be reserves in the future, we accept, but those reserves should be commensurate with what the problem is. We accept that some of those reserves we need to borrow forward and then look again at the tax and resource situation in the coming year, beyond, into the next financial year. So on this, you see effectively that there is a borrow forward, which would allow us. Now, it's prudent in that none of the reserves in there are the ones which are likely to be taken up. So there is a level of risk which is low, that they would be required. And we have already said that the balances, etc., we have been careful in those. So what you see in front of us is something that would protect our services, protect the position that we're in now, and allow us to go forward. So that gap in reserves. On that basis, it's a sound proposal, and we believe that there needs to be a method in the future of dealing with our budgets, but this is a way of dealing with the crisis that we have now. And on that basis, Provost, I would move that we consider and adopt that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Do you have a seconder?
By a coincidence, Provost, yes, I am happy to second Councillor Johnson.
Okay. Do you wish to speak at this point?
Yes, I will. Thank you. I think that just makes sense. So I can just continue from what my colleague has just said. So, colleagues, in rising to support the Democratic, Independent and Green Group's budget proposal, and I have actually stood up, even though I'm at home, in proper style, I would like to make a number of points. Firstly, of course, there is considerable overlap between our budget proposal and the administration's budget proposal, and no doubt there will be with the other budget proposals that we hear this morning. They're all the same council. The overwhelming proportion of what the council did last year, it's going to do next year, and that will be true under all the budget proposals. There are some differences, although the council leader didn't say very much about them. The administration has taken greater savings from existing service provision than we are proposing to do. So, for example, they have taken a saving of 2.201 million from the education budget. We have taken only 1.504 million from the education budget by way of savings from existing services. And we thought that the savings that we were prepared to accept, some of which are genuinely completely painless, some of which are acceptable, but we would not do if we did not have to, that 1.504 was the limit of what we thought was reasonable. So there are some differences there. There are other areas where, in a sense, money has been labelled differently. So the administration has removed the renewable energy reserve, but put in 500,000 for sustainability and feasibility work for the carbon budget. Can I just say in passing, I very, very much welcome the commitment they've made, but the difference with us was that we didn't remove the renewable energy reserve. So the money for renewable energy and carbon reduction was still there in our budget, but differently labelled, and we also absolutely support the provision of all of that feasibility work. But there's really just two budget lines in our budget that I want to highlight, and it comes back to the statement that Councillor Johnson reminded us of, and that the revenue budget is a statement of the priorities for the year ahead in financial terms, and that traditionally always appeared in our revenue budget paper, and is exactly correct. So there are two big items in our budget which certainly aren't in the administration budget and may or may not be in other budgets that we hear this morning. One is an additional saving of £1 million on roads maintenance, and the other is the reinstatement of teaching posts that the council removed as a budget saving some years ago. And I would talk to the reason why we have decided to make that those changes in our budget, and it does come down to priorities. So all of us here would ideally like the Aberdeenshire Council would be the best council in Scotland at everything that councils do. I have no doubt about that. But the reality is we all know we can't afford to do that. So we have to choose where we put our greatest effort. And that is a political choice. That is exactly the point the budget makes. It's about the council's priorities. And in our case, priority, if you like, is education, education, education. So if I look at two statistics, one is the Scottish Road Maintenance Conditions Survey. And Aberdeenshire Council is doing really well on that. We are the second best council in Scotland, and our road condition index is 22.6%, which is considerably better than the national average of 34.2%. So everybody in the chamber is congratulating themselves that we do really well on roads. But if I then look at another set of summary statistics, and that is the summary statistics for schools in Scotland 2021, published by the Scottish Government, Chapter 3, the pupil-teacher ratio. In Aberdeenshire, the pupil-teacher ratio is 13.4 pupils per teacher. 21 of the 32 councils in Scotland have a lower, i.e. better, pupil-teacher ratio. They have fewer pupils per teacher. The Scottish average is 13.2. So in this case, although absolutely I accept that pupil-teacher ratio is not the only measure of how good education is anything like, and there are all sorts of factors about how rural it is and so on, but nevertheless it's a valid statistic that on average in Scotland there are fewer pupils per teacher than there are in Aberdeenshire. And the point here is that the road statistic and the teacher statistic are not independent. I do, of course, fully realise that there is additional funding for teachers in the Scottish Government settlement, which we will commit, and that's 7.288 million. But note that in our budget proposal, simply reinstating the teachers and pupil support assistants that we took out of the budget a couple of years ago is 2.1 million. So put that in context. So our contention is simply that if I'm asked, if the council can only be best at some things, what do I want it to be best at? My answer is education, not tarmac. I think it's far, far more important to invest in the education and the future of our young people than it is in having the second best tarmac in Scotland. And that's why we have included in our budget effectively a movement of money from roads maintenance to education, because this is a statement of our priorities for the year ahead. Now, I don't know whether a similar proposal will be in other groups' budgets, but it ought to be. And I think, and obviously I'm not party to the considerations and due diligence that the other groups have put into deciding their budget priorities. But if you stand back and look and ask what's most important to us, I think it's important that we do as best as we possibly can in everything, but put the priorities on the things that matter to us most. And for us as a group, the thing that matters most is education, education, education in this context. And if we have to have only average roads to pay for the increased number of teachers, so be it. So I commend the big budget proposal to the Chamber. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. Councillor Topping, please.
Yes, thank you, Provost. Good morning. Could I, on behalf of the ALBA Party Group on Aberdeenshire Council, we would like to take the opportunity, like other speakers, to thank Mary Beattie and Paul Mitchell and all the finance team for all their help in putting together the ALBA budget proposals. Good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure in proposing the ALBA Party Group's first ever budget for Aberdeenshire Council for the years 2022-23. The ALBA Party Group are proposing a council tax freeze. I'll just repeat that, a council tax freeze. As we're all aware of the huge rise in the cost of living, fuel cost rises, electric and gas bills going up through the roof, everything we buy has increased significantly. All those things and more are making things extremely difficult for everyone and causing great hardship. Many of our constituents will be having to make the difficult decisions on whether to feed their family or pay their gas or electric bills. The ALBA Party nationally pleaded with the Scottish Government to freeze the council tax and to give local authorities the necessary funding to allow this to happen. This sadly fell on deaf ears. As we will all see, we are proposing to pay for this by using £4.516 million from reserves. We currently have almost £76 million in reserves. We, the ALBA Party, are supportive of having reserves available for unknown eventualities, but when times are so critical, we feel that we need to give what help we can to our constituents. We also have put forward a proposal to spend an additional £750,000, that's £750,000, towards improvements to landscape services maintenance budget, including improved maintenance of our cemeteries, play parks and open spaces within our towns and villages, and to provide plants and bulbs for our local communities to brighten up our communities. Now, this is in no reflection at all to do with the hard-working, dedicated staff, but as I say, to do with the cutbacks we've had in recent years, we feel that the complaints we've had about cemeteries and open spaces with the reductions is an idea that we would like to put forward. The additional funding for this will also come from reserve fund, making a total that the Alba Party are proposing £5.316 million from reserves, which still leaves a massive £69,176,000 still in reserves. We, the Alba Party, are proposing to use the money received from the Scottish Government's Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund to introduce free school meals for primary 5 to 7 pupils, costing £3.665 million. More detail about this from my Alba Party Group Deputy Leader, Councillor Lee Wilson. Also, we accept the officials' proposed savings that were put forward, and can also say, just to finish off, in these tough and challenging economic times, Provost, fellow councillors, and the hardship faced by our constituents, which will get increasingly worse as the months go in, a song comes to mind, with a little help from our friends, and that, of course, the friends are the Alba Party. With that, I strongly commend Alba Party's budget, Provost and fellow councillors, and I seek a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Topping. Do you have a seconder?
I'll second Provost.
Thank you.
Provost.
Yes?
It's Karen Wells. I think I need to come in on this.
Sorry. Yes, go on, Karen.
Your indulgence, Provost. I'm seeing, as you are, the Alba Party's proposals for the first time, and I'm noting within it a change to the council tax position, which was agreed at the meeting in February. So in order for this to be a competent motion, either the standing order, which prohibits a change or a deviation from a decision within 6 months, would need to be made. That would require a 2/3 majority of those in present and voting today to support that suspension of standing orders, unless the Alba Party wish to amend their budget proposals in order to bring it in line with the council tax decision, which was taken in February.
Thank you. It's very difficult to hear, Karen, what you were saying.
Sorry, I'll try that again.
Yes, that's better. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, so to say that again, I'm seeing, as you are, the budget proposals for the first time from the Alba Party, and I'm noting in there that it's based on a change to the council tax position. The council tax was agreed at your meeting in February, and if it's the case that the Alba Party wish to rely on a change in that, then there would need to be a suspension of standing orders. The relevant standing order being 7.2, I believe, which states that no decision can be altered within 6 months. So the decision having been taken on council tax previously at your meeting in February would require a suspension of standing orders for this to be competent. The alternative is for the Alba Party to amend their budget proposals in order to reflect the decision on council tax that was taken at your meeting in February.
Thank you very much. Councillor Topping.
Yes, Chair, can I say that this is actually quite astounding. We have gone through the proper process. We were advised by the finance officer, and perhaps the finance officer, Mary Beattie or Paul Mitchell, would be able to come in, because we were advised that this meeting we were allowed to put forward, even though it was different, we could put forward our budget based on a council tax freeze. We have done that. Everything we've put forward has been agreed as a competent budget by the Finance Department. So I'm kind of at a loss, and perhaps Mary Beattie, if she's available, might be able to come in to comment. Provost, thank you.
Well, the comments have come from Mrs. Wiles. That's the point, and she's making a very clear point. So how do you respond to that?
Well, as I say, I'm at a loss at the moment, Provost, because we have been told that everything was in order, everything was a proper balanced budget. It was signed off by the Finance Department, which we're very grateful for. This has come as quite a shock that this has been raised just today.
Okay, Mrs. Wiles, please.
Well, Provost, I can only say in that respect that I haven't been consulted on that particular standing order by the party, and I understand Councillor Topping's frustration, but he will have been receiving financial advice on whether a budget balanced or not, and that differs from the governance advice that's required in relation to the council standing orders. I can understand his frustration, but I can't allow the council to accept an incompetent amendment.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring the Chief Executive in, please, and then Mary Beattie. Chief Executive, please.
Promise, thank you. Just to help here, the amendment in front of the council could be agreed if council chose to vary standing orders as Mrs. Wiles has set out. So it is in the gift of council as to how it wishes to proceed, and it's on that basis that the advice is being given to the party, to the group, in terms of the basis of their financial proposals. They clearly reflect their position originally in terms of council tax. They've chosen not to reflect the council's position, it seems, in terms of council tax setting at 3%, but it is therefore for council to decide if they wish to proceed with this when they can do so, but with a variation of standing orders. So I think it's there to be debated and to be accepted or not. But I think, as Mrs. Wiles said, that is with the needs the will of council to proceed, but at the moment it would not be competent unless council do agree to proceed in some way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mary Beattie. Head of Finance, Mary.
Sorry, Provost, my
No, it's okay.
Skype is getting a wee bit out of kilter here. I do apologise to Councillor Topping for the confusion that I've caused in my advice to him. Thanks, Provost.
Okay. So, Council will have to make a decision, and this is where we are. Leader of the Council, please.
Provost, thank you. Clearly, as Mrs. Wiles has advised us, Councillor Topping's proposal is not competent unless we suspend standing orders. I am tempted to agree and suspend standing orders. I actually think, for the council purposes, that may be more efficient, and we could have the vote in a lot less time than debating the various other aspects. With fair confidence that the Alba budget will not be the one we end up with.
Mm-hmm. So, Mrs. Wiles,
I have a comment on this, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask a question, then I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask Mrs. Wiles. Well, that would take another. You'd have to be a motion. Is that the point that we're making?
It would need to be a motion to suspend standing orders, which
Right.
would need to be supported by a 2/3 majority of those present and voting.
Right. Okay.
A little uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
I think the council tax letters have been printed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little uncomfortable with that, although it is technically possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Provost, may I come back, please?
Yes, please.
I think Mrs. Wiles' point about the council tax letters is very well made. I've not the administration's instructions, but that is a very good. So I think we need to stick with standing orders and not suspend. Provost, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Not suspend, did you say?
I believe so. I think Mrs. Wiles' most recent point there, should a miracle happen and it go through, then it would be a bit of a problem. So no, I think we should not suspend.
Not suspend. Any other points in this?
Yes.
Provost.
Sorry.
Yes. So, who is it?
Councillor Ford.
Yes, please.
Yes. Well, I thought the leader was being exceptionally generous, in his first position. I support, however, his second position. I do not think we should suspend standing orders, and my reasons are as follows. Firstly, look, the council takes decisions that many of us disagree with all of the time. Many decisions that I disagree with, and it took a decision that I disagreed with on the council tax, but it took a decision. And the council cannot keep on revisiting decisions. The whole purpose of the 6-month rule is to provide some certainty and stability. The council took a decision for better or worse on the council tax, and I don't think it's at all sensible or reasonable to revisit it at this late stage. As far as the Alpha Party is concerned, I'm sure they've received advice, but at the end of the day, councillors receive advice. They're not told what to do. The Democratic Independent and Green Group budget, which you've all previously now just seen, took account of the fact that the council tax rise was not the one that we chose and put a workaround in to allow for that, and that's how we chose to do it. And the Alpha Party could have done the same, but the judgment on how to do that and whether to do that does not lie with the officers' advice. It lies with the 3 councillors in that group. And they can read the standing orders the same as the rest of us, and they knew what the position was, and they know what the rules are. And if they wish to propose a budget that requires the lifting of standing orders, then that should be put to the test. But I will not be voting to lift standing orders. The business of providing a competent budget proposal is for them, not for officers, and they have not done so.
Okay. Councillor Topping, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Provost. Can I just, I would obviously move that we do suspend standing orders, and can I say I'm extremely unhappy that we're trying to be silenced. I did appreciate the comments of the council leader, which I thought was fair. As he said, our budget obviously won't win. Now, in our budget, we were advised quite strongly that because the council tax was set the other week there, Provost, that we would have to, that it was okay to go forward, and we've actually got in our budget administration costs of £50,000, which we were told would be the cost of putting letters back out again. So basically, that's why we've got the 50,000 added in. We're advised we can do that, put in the 50,000, because that would be the cost of putting new letters out if in the eventuality our budget was approved, which obviously is not going to be approved. But as I say, we were advised that, we put it in there, and as I say, I take very much the experience and professionalism of our officers. We took that as read, we put it in, we got told that it was a balanced budget, everything was fine. So if we've been told otherwise at this late stage, I'm absolutely astounded no one advised of this before. So I move that we suspend standing orders, Provost. Thank you for your forbearance. Thank you.
Councillor Petrie, please.
Thank you, Provost. I just want to come in and say that the partnership would support not suspending standing orders. Councillor Toppin does like to remind us he's one of the longest standing councillors in this council. He's been through this budget process numerous times, and I'm quite uncomfortable that he has just pointed to the advice he got from finance officers in terms of his budget not being competent. The finance officers are not there to advise on whether budgets are competent. That's what our monitoring officers are for. And I am uncomfortable that Ms Beattie has felt she's had to come in and apologise there. And I would just say that I'm not comfortable with that one at all. I'm sorry that Ms Beattie felt she had to do that. We've been through this process numerous times. Councillor Toppin knows the standing orders, and I would strongly support that we don't suspend them in this case. And in terms of his comments about being silenced, you've just had 10 minutes to outline your proposals, Councillor Toppin. We have heard them. You are not being silenced. It's just that you have taken a proposal in front of us which is not competent. Thank you.
Well, I think, I'll ask Mrs Wells, I think we'll have to have a formal vote then to take this forward.
Is Councillor Topping's motion to suspend standing orders seconded, Provost?
That's good. Yes.
I'll second, Provost.
Right, okay. So,
in that case, it's normally done on a show of hands, but of course in the virtual setting we're required to do a roll call vote then. I'll hand over to Mrs Riddle to do that vote.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello.
Anne, are you in the meeting?
Yes, I do apologise. I seem to have lost my connection there for a second. Okay, so we have a motion to suspend standing orders. So the vote will be taken in alphabetical order. If you can vote yes or no, please, to suspending standing orders. I'll go through in alphabetical order now.
Just a moment. Sorry, I've seen someone wanting to speak. Just a moment. Leader of the Council, please.
Provost, I was going to put an amendment in if you needed one, but clearly we don't. So,
Okay, sorry, apologies. Thank you. Okay.
So if members can just vote yes to suspending standing orders or no. Councillor Agnew. Councillor Aitchison.
No.
Councillor Allen.
No.
Councillor Argyle.
No.
Sorry. Councillor Bailey.
No.
Councillor Beagrie. Councillor Berry.
No.
Councillor Buse. Councillor Blackett.
No.
Councillor Bruce.
No.
Councillor Alan Buchan.
No.
Councillor Charles Buchan.
No.
Councillor Marion Buchan.
No.
Councillor Calder.
No.
Councillor Carr.
No.
Councillor Cassie.
No.
Councillor Cox.
No.
Councillor Davidson.
No.
Councillor Dickinson.
No.
Councillor Duncan. Councillor Donnell.
No.
Councillor Everson.
No.
Councillor Ewanson.
No.
Councillor Fakeley.
No.
Councillor Findlater.
No.
Councillor Ford.
No.
Councillor Forsyth.
No.
Councillor Gibb.
No.
Councillor Gifford. Councillor Harper.
No.
Councillor Hassan.
No.
Provost Howitson.
No.
Councillor Hutchison.
No.
Councillor Johnston.
No.
Councillor Keating.
No.
Councillor Kill.
no.
Councillor Cloppert.
No.
Councillor Leslie. Councillor Launchy.
No.
Councillor Mayer.
No.
Councillor McAllister.
No.
Councillor McHale.
No.
Councillor Mollison.
No.
Councillor Owen.
No.
Councillor Partridge. Councillor Petrie.
No.
Councillor Pike.
No.
Councillor Powell.
No.
Councillor Reid.
No.
Councillor Reynolds.
No.
Councillor Ross.
No.
Councillor Roy.
No.
Councillor Simpson.
No.
Councillor Hazel Smith.
No.
Councillor Norman Smith.
No.
Councillor Stephen Smith.
No.
Councillor Stirling.
No.
Councillor Sutherland.
No.
Councillor Taylor.
No.
Councillor Topping.
Yes.
Councillor Walker.
No.
Councillor Wallace.
No.
Councillor White.
No.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes.
Councillor Withy.
No.
Provost, we've not achieved the 2/3 majority required. I don't feel it's necessary to go back to those that didn't respond.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Is that clear? Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to Councillor Everson, please.
So I apologise, Provost. I've just noticed in the instant message bar that Councillor Topping's asking for his dissent to be recorded,
Right.
which he needs to state at the time of the vote taking place. So if I can just confirm with him, please.
Yes, of course.
Yes, I didn't want to interrupt the Provost. Yes, I'd like to enter my dissent, please, Provost. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Everson, please.
Thank you very much, Provost, and I'm putting forward the partnership's competent proposals as an amendment to Appendix 3, the proposed budget, revenue budget, but note from the start that I am waiving my right to sum up in favour of Councillor Petrie. Firstly, I would like to commend the leader's support for the expansion of participatory budgeting in his budget speech, a process which we have continually championed ourselves, so thanks to the leader for that. Before I start, I would like to similarly express the thanks of the partnership to officers who have supported us throughout the whole budget setting process. The challenges faced by the council as it seeks to deliver services across our communities have again been immense, and I would like to acknowledge the huge commitment of all council staff on whom these services depend. I am acutely aware that gratitude is not enough, but I do hope that these words can be accepted as a reflection of the value in which we hold all council staff. Indeed, in our budget proposals, we have tried to minimise disruption and upheaval. We have been making efficiencies and taking savings wherever we can for many years now. There are no savings left to take without impacting on delivery. We are aware that any reductions to council teams, particularly at a time when there is an increasing demand on council services, would have a huge impact on those left behind, harming both physical and mental well-being. Aberdeenshire is a major local employer and has responsibilities to encourage fair work practices. For these reasons, we have maintained our principled objection to using voluntary severance as a means to budget cuts and are removing future phrases from our proposals today. Let me stress, there can be a place of voluntary severance, but we do not believe our budget should be dependent on it. Our budget proposals are presented with an acute awareness of the context in which we are living. The pandemic is still with us, impacting on how people live their lives and the confidence many feel. Many of our communities of place and communities of interest are feeling the impact of EU exit, with some people moving away and taking their skills with them. There are changing demands on council services and in many areas a new difficulty recruiting. Increasing energy prices, food prices, national insurance contributions, basic living expenses mean that more people are struggling on low income, and we know that inequalities that existed before have become exacerbated. The recent storms have added to the suffering. And as we rightly seek to support the people of Ukraine, including through sanctions, we are aware that we need to make council services available to all who need them in increasingly difficult times. And we know that not only has the budget settlement from the Scottish Government not given us all that we need to support the services on which people and communities depend, but the policies coming from the UK Government have increased the numbers looking to us for support. Meanwhile, it is those of us in local government who work more closely with our communities, and we who can well express the impact of political choices made elsewhere on them. Our combined voice needs to be heard. It is the joint impact of the budget settlement and the experiences of our communities that have led us this year to removing money from reserves to enable a balanced budget. And you can now see our budget on the screen, I hope. The money in reserves is there for times of need. This is a time of need. We want to ensure as much stability as we can. Now is not the time for huge change. Although we have had to take some further savings, we have done so only where necessary for building and modernising an organisation for the future which can continue to serve, conscious that some of the funding we have this year is non-recurring. We have retained our focus on the importance of education, on mental health and well-being, and on the environment in which people live. With an acute awareness of the impact of recent storms, we have protected the Countryside Paths budget. We value the benefits that can come from performing in a group and have therefore limited substantially the increase to music centre fees. We have protected the budget to children's services so that there can be officers in place for the new joint investigative interviewing process, supporting children required to give evidence to the courts. Further, for the safety of local children, we are retaining our school crossing patrollers. The priority needs to be recovery and renewal. And we need to do all we can to establish partnerships with others so that this can be maintained. The work of our area teams has come into its own during the pandemic, and we want to strengthen support to them and their partners in community learning and development going forward. We know that they can together play a huge role in developing resilient communities, and we want to ensure that officer time can be focused on preventative work, helping communities and volunteers to establish systems and practices before they are needed. And we have seen recently just how much they can be needed. We must ensure that any barriers to local engagement between the council and community partners are broken down, including financial barriers. We have collective experience to show that resilience takes investment and planning, with support in place for refreshing and updating local plans, training and the sharing of best practice. It depends on effective and timely communication and access to additional advice and support for people in need. We want to be able to develop the system so that no matter the context of the natural or the political world, the next warm meal is not an issue and the value of both physical and mental health is valued. That is why we are investing £250,000 in supporting the development of community resilience and intend this money is used for both office support and direct grants to communities. We also know that the issue of road maintenance across Aberdeenshire has become far more than a matter of keeping local roads in effective order. As councillors, we will all have seen the anger from our communities about roads full of potholes and will recognise the negative impact that this is having on community well-being and local recovery. We therefore cannot support the continuation of a reserve of £2.5 million being held for road maintenance. We find the existence of that size of reserve very hard to explain to our communities, whom we know are desperate to see the money spent. We are therefore moving half of that money direct into the revenue budget with the intention of it being spent this financial year on improvements to our local roads. Excuse me. This is one example of where the council does have to make the money it has work harder and more quickly. Our third priority is the development of an idea proposed by the administration last year, and I thank them for establishing the infrastructure fund. We propose this year investing further in this fund and expanding on the use of capital borrowing, which the fund makes possible. We are very aware of the roles and responsibilities of the council in responding to climate change and moving towards net zero, and we know that to achieve this will also take investment in new ways of working. By adding an extra £300,000 to this fund, we are enabling an additional £5.5 million of borrowing. We propose renaming this fund the Infrastructure and Net Zero Fund. I repeat that, we propose renaming this fund the Infrastructure and Net Zero Fund and using it appropriately. We have a huge role to play in achieving net zero targets. Finally, we know how useful the money allocated to us from the Scottish Government last week will be to support economic recovery, supporting local businesses and people surviving on low incomes. We know how important local engagement will be to make sure the money is used to maximum effect. The voice of diverse lived experience needs to be heard to enhance decision making. Our own proposals for its use are to support the mental and physical well-being that underpins all activities, and hence we have discussed with officers how we can open up no-cost sessions at Live Life Aberdeenshire facilities for people on low income. In addition, we would support the development of community cafes in rural areas where residents can enjoy warmth and food, while also looking at products available from Aberdeenshire-based companies. Further, we would support the Aberdeenshire-wide development of the Fiberfest scheme, which Councillor Petrie will speak more about. I have repeatedly said in budget speeches for the partnership that we are focused on delivering on our vision of Aberdeenshire as a welcoming, inclusive place where fairness, kindness and equality underpin all we do, and where all our young people can feel they have a worthwhile future. And all of this must have relevance to every part of Aberdeenshire, so that the unique needs of regeneration areas like Peterhead, Fraserburgh, Bamford and Macduff are recognised and responded to, as are the needs of our rural communities and of each of our diverse towns. That is what our budget again proposals set out to do, and I move them as laid out on the screen and seek and seconder in Councillor Petrie, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Petrie, please.
Thank you, Provost. Sorry, I was just starting my camera there. And I'm happy to come in to second Councillor Evison's amendment and budget proposals. Councillor Evison has just outlined the many factors which are impacting on us financially, both us as a council and for those we represent. And this makes the budget process increasingly difficult. As we make financial decisions, we're trying our best to protect those living throughout Aberdeenshire. Local government is at the forefront of service delivery, and this became even more apparent throughout the pandemic. Both national governments look to us to deliver many policies, and this is carried out as well as the day-to-day working to deliver services to our communities. And I think we can all agree, and I've said this before, that we'd like to see more money for local government. We are all here to deliver for those we represent, and that would become much easier with less pressure in terms of budgetary decisions. However, and something else I've mentioned before, the financial pressure we are under is also felt by the Scottish Government, and to be fair, the UK Government, although it at least has borrowing powers. To increase local government funding, something else needs cut, and that is a difficult decision in itself when so many other public services are also in need of money. I've also previously commended the work of COSLA and the united voice with which councillors spoke to ensure that we received additional funding this year. This is vital, and I hope that this cooperation can continue with the new council term and the new councillors elected throughout Scotland. Turning back to our own budget, we know the financial position. Many of our residents are feeling the pressure, and this will only intensify in the coming months. Now, many of our residents don't have reserves. The Scottish Government don't have reserves, but we as a council do, and now is the time to use them, and I'm pleased to hear this is coming from more than just our group as well. I fully understand that it is prudent for us to hold some reserves, but it is very hard to justify making any savings or cuts to service delivery when we hold the level we do. We are in unprecedented times, and it is therefore my strong belief that now is the time to use some of these reserves. Because of other budget decisions we have made as a partnership, and as already outlined by Councillor Evison, we are only taking just over 4.8 million from reserves, which still leaves a significant amount across the various accounts. In order to provide as much stability and certainty to those throughout Aberdeenshire, I think this is a reasonable and sensible move. In terms of the savings we have made, we are seeing some genuine efficiencies around modernising new ways of working. We are saving on phone lines as we move to online calls, and we are in a position to substantially cut travel costs for staff. The pandemic has caused much upheaval and upset, but in amongst all of that, there are some good changes which can be learnt from as we move forward. And these decisions not only improve the way our staff work, but we can now also see demonstrable financial advantages too. And we have purposely not taken the suggested saving on staffing in the finance team, which I see the administration, the DIGS and ALBA have proposed to take. In the financial circumstances we find ourselves in, and with the additional work the team must undertake, it is vital that they are fully staffed to ensure that they continue with that important work without undue pressure on all those in the team. We must keep those posts and do what we can to recruit to them. And just to refer quickly to the ALBA proposals, I think we can all be glad they weren't competent, because there were some proposals in there which were quite worrying. The removal of school crossing patrollers would have sparked concern throughout Aberdeenshire, and that's just one that I would highlight. Councillor Evison has outlined the main points of focus from our budget, and I want to talk in more detail about the proposals from the Partnership for Aberdeenshire's share of the Local Authority COVID Economic Recovery Fund. The fund was set up to support local economic recovery and the cost of living impacts on low-income houses. We know the difficulties, and we must now look at how we can ease the burden. We've only had the guiding principles for a very short period, and therefore we are proposing our ideas for this fund with the suggestion that further work on how to deliver each project is undertaken throughout the coming year. Firstly, we know the benefits to our mental and physical health from both physical activity and participation in cultural services. But we also know that there are financial barriers for some in participating in such activities. And we therefore propose looking at sessions at our Live Life Aberdeenshire facilities, during which low-income families can participate for free. Secondly, we know there's a stigma attached to poverty. That stigma regularly stops people from seeking support and assistance. We propose a programme of community cafes with a focus on rural areas, which will not only encourage social interaction, which has been much missed throughout the pandemic, but where there will also be practical advice and support available for those who may require it. This not only helps those struggling financially, but it reduces social isolation. And finally, we know our town centres and local businesses have struggled. And we have a proposal that will both help increase footfall in local shops, whilst also encouraging and enabling families to choose to shop local. In Huntly, the town team has been working for a number of years to regenerate the town and the economy there. And as part of the regeneration work, the local business association organised various weeks of the Fiver Fest, where local businesses offer a range of deals and products for a fiver. These weeks have been a great success, and I'm sure there are similar examples in other towns and areas too. And what we propose is the facilitation of the scheme on an Aberdeenshire-wide basis to ensure that the benefits can be brought to all of the towns throughout the area to provide a welcome economic boost and some great buys for residents. Overall, our budget is one of stability, but very much with a focus on our communities and how we move throughout the current difficulties whilst supporting those who need it. We've been tested like never before over the last 2 years, and the resilience of our communities has shone through. And let's work with them as we move forward. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Petrie. Councillor Owen, please.
Thank you, Provost. I'll just put my set my video. There we go. Thank you very much. Provost, I would like to start by paying tribute to all the staff within the Education and Children's Services, ably led by Lawrence Finley and his leadership team, and more importantly, the children and young people in our care. We have had a couple of surreal years, but the service has pulled together to continue the journey that our young people travel. The budget clearly recognises education as one of the key priorities of Aberdeenshire Council and will allow us to ensure we continue investing in improving outcomes for young people in all our schools and early years settings. We will introduce a revised devolved school management scheme next year, devolving budget directly to head teachers so that they can best use available resources to meet local needs. Whilst this has been the norm in secondary schools for some time, this revised devolved school management scheme will be a shift for our primary and special schools, but is essentially in a locally empowered school-led system where head teachers working with their staff, pupils and parents are best placed to determine how best to use their budgets. The central team in Education and Children's Services, working with colleagues in other services, will continue to look at how we provide an appropriate support offer to ensure head teachers can effectively manage their budgets. Building on the lessons learned from remote learning, we will continue to look at how we can enhance our digital offering to our young people. And this will include significant redesign of how we provide instrumental music tuition. Within Children's Services, this budget also recognises the efforts already underway to keep the promise as we as a council made to our care experienced young people at council last April. And as such, we will continue to invest in developing approaches to holistic family support centred on the importance of the early intervention and prevention. Education and Children's Services will also look to continue promoting participatory budgeting approaches in our schools through the revised devolved school management scheme, and also by building on the successes of last year's pilot project led by our community learning and development team in conjunction with schools and Young Scott. Importantly, next year's participatory budget approach in schools will focus on climate change and carbon reduction, areas where we hope to make a real difference over the years ahead. And it is essential that our young people have a key leadership role in designing the future we want to see for the environment around us. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Owen. Thank you. Now, I don't have any others waiting to speak at this juncture, but given the time, I would suggest that we have a 10-minute break and then carry on with the final stages of this paper. Would that be helpful?
Yes, please.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much. That would be 5 minutes past 12. Sorry. Yes.
Provost, may I come in?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I note that Councillor Sterling is looking to contribute, and so is Councillor Wallace. And I wonder when we do have our recess, whether we can have it for a bit longer so that the groups can consider the various budgets, and then when we return, sum up and vote.
Oh, I noticed. this, I didn't see, sorry, Councillor Wallace or in this.
They've only just appeared, Provost. But I wonder when we do recess if we can do it for a little longer so that we can consider the budget.
Yes. Well, would it be convenient to have 15 minutes from now?
If that's your wish, Provost, that'll be fine, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think yes, and we can carry on from there. So,
Provost.
Yes.
Provost, I have a very short comment to make, and I would prefer to make it before the groups convene.
Okay. Please.
May I go? Thank you, Provost. What I notice about the various competent budgets presented to us is much more their similarity than their differences, but it is inevitably their differences that we must focus on. I wanted to put a question that perhaps the leader of the council or perhaps other Conservative members in particular, but possibly other members might wish to respond to. Is there anything that they can point to in this budget that would not have happened had the Conservatives not been in power? Or conversely, is there anything that would most definitely have happened, you know, sorry, it amounts to the same thing. Is there anything that is distinctly Conservative that would not have occurred had the Conservatives not presented a budget? I would ask if they would be willing to, at some point, respond to that, just to give me some sort of feel. Thank you very much.
I'll ask Mrs. Wiles if that's a competent.
Sorry, Provost, put my headset on. Yes, Councillor Wallace is simply engaging in the discussion over the various motions and amendments, and he's inviting those who have put forward motions and amendments to convince him of their arguments. It's up to themselves as to whether they wish to address that in order to secure Councillor Wallace's vote, and they may wish to do that in their summing up.
Okay, okay, that's very helpful. So, let me think. 10 minutes past 12. Would that be acceptable?
Provost?
Yes.
Chief Executive, I wondered whether Councillor Sterling may want to come in before the break, Provost. It's clearly your choice, but just wanted to double check.
No. I'm just trying to be as fair as possible. Councillor Sterling, please.
Thank you very much, Provost, and I appreciate your allowing me in at this point. Really, I just wanted to comment on the Council's approach to tackling poverty and inequality, which has never been has never felt quite so important given the challenges that individuals, families and communities are facing now and will face in the coming months. And we've heard from a number of speakers across the chamber this morning that actually we're all concerned about the particular circumstances people are finding themselves in at the moment. But this budget will create the means by which we can, in partnership with others, provide much needed support and assistance to those that need it. There are a number of areas that will be targeted, and if I can give some examples of those. Firstly, the increases to the cost of living will continue to have an impact, and many in our communities will need support in order to ensure they can heat and eat. And in addition, we're aware access to affordable credit is an issue, and we want to take that forward in Aberdeenshire. We also want to ensure people are maximising their income from employment. A detailed progress report, including plans for next year with regard to tackling poverty and inequalities, will be coming to the next meeting of the Communities Committee, where I look forward to having further discussion and thereafter to be able to take these issues forward. And in the future, Live Life Aberdeenshire Housing and Health and Social Care Partnership will also play crucial roles in maintaining and sustaining people's good physical and mental health and well-being. And to that end, certainly we have agreed at the last full council meeting a housing revenue account budget, both in terms of revenue and capital, and that received support from everyone in the council chamber. So again, that will take forward some services for tenants and to look at that wider impact that they will be facing in the time ahead. Health and Social Care Partnership are also committed to supporting fair work practices, as has been mentioned already today. They will also be minded to support unpaid carers, who are the backbone of much of the service provision across our communities and for their families and friends indeed. So we must be mindful of the unpaid carers and the support that they require going forward, because they also have been impacted heavily in recent times. Also, there's an issue about strengthening the workforce, particularly in health and social care. Social care would be something that we would be minded to be monitoring. Recruitment is very difficult, and there are a number of vacancies across that sector. So again, we need to put a considerable amount of work in to make sure that we do have the workforce, and that the increased demands and pressures on service provision due to increased costs and demographics across Aberdeenshire are met. And we should strive to ensure that everyone works collaboratively with communities and services to provide the services to meet the demands and needs of our residents. And finally, Provost, Live Life Aberdeenshire. This budget will continue to allow Live Life Aberdeenshire to develop a modern, progressive offer to the people of Aberdeenshire through investing in key areas of Live Life Well and Live Life Outdoors. The budget will allow the service to continue on modernisation and to look to provide bespoke experiences across Aberdeenshire, bringing opportunities as close to where people live as possible. There'll also be a continuation to develop the approach to participatory budgeting, which you've heard about already, further to that successful work undertaken in the Stonehaven area. Live Life Aberdeenshire will look to provide engaging holiday activities for young people in all our communities, focusing on reaching those most in need to ensure focus again on mental and physical health and well-being. And if I can just respond to the idea of no-cost services or no-cost sessions being provided, to that end, Communities Committee at its last meeting agreed to set up a cross-party working group, member officer working group, to consider the future of membership schemes and indeed charges across the piece, and that will be done in conjunction with Education and Children's Services. So, Provost, I think we're all agreed that there is much to do. The services that will be provided have to be of the highest quality and continue to meet the needs of our people in Aberdeenshire. And I would just add my sincere thanks to all of our staff for the continued commitment and dedication to delivering those high quality services in these most difficult and challenging times. So thank you very much, Provost, for allowing me in at this juncture. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Councillor Sterling. No, my apologies because my screen didn't pick it up properly.
Not at all.
I do apologise.
No, not required, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Okay. So I'm quite keen. I think it would be only fair to have a break now. So would you like 20 minutes? 20 minutes break. Is that helpful? Not helpful?
Provost, may I?
Yes,
I think 20 minutes at least would be helpful. Can I suggest a 10-minute comfort break and then 10 minutes for the various meetings to review things, and then back here in 20 as you suggest?
Well, that's a heart of gold. I have no problem with that at all. No.
Want to take over for the moment?
Okay, thank you. Just switch on my microphone. Right. Yes, thank you. Yes, restart the recording.
Yes, we started that, Councillor McHale, thank you.
Okay. Would you go to the Leader of the Council?
We're on summations, Councillor McHale.
Okay.
Can you do those in reverse order?
Okay, my apologies.
That's all right.
Councillor Everson first.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Everson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost, but I waived my right to sum up in favour of Councillor Petrie, if you remember. So Councillor Petrie is doing the summing up for the partnership.
Councillor Petrie, please.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. As mentioned previously, our budget is one with a focus on communities and stability for them in the current turmoil of our world. We have limited how many savings we have made and instead have focused on using some of our reserves to limit the impact on those we represent. We have included commitments to road repairs, infrastructure developments and net zero targets to ensure that we take a balanced approach in all that we do. Further, we have made a further financial commitment to working with communities to strengthen their resilience and ensuring that they are as well prepared as they can be for whatever is next thrown at them. We've also proposed and outlined our view for how to spend the funding allocated specifically for local economic recovery and in support to those who are feeling the cost of living crisis the most. And I'd hope that that is something that we can work cross-chamber on to deliver for people and businesses throughout Aberdeenshire. And the partnership do welcome the increased commitment from the administration to participatory budgeting. The involvement of our communities in our decision making is crucial, and our commitment as a council to this is refreshing. Unfortunately, we maintain different stances in terms of the voluntary severance scheme and some other staffing decisions too. And we differ quite vastly from the DIGS budget approach that we take to roads maintenance. We have seen deterioration to our roads despite best efforts, and there's a real impact to residents, vehicle drivers and cyclists from them deteriorating further. It is important that we commit to repairs on them. And to briefly touch on the proposals from ALBA, what they proposed was incompetent due to our standing orders, and it does raise concerns that they didn't take appropriate advice from the correct officers, but it would not have been sensible to allow those proposals to be voted on in this instance, and the majority of the councillors present agreed with them. We have also ensured through our budget that we protect and support our staff to ensure that there is no undue or exacerbated pressure on them. They've worked tirelessly, and it is vitally important that they receive our continued support. And with that, Deputy Provost, I think that sums up what we have put forward, and I would commend our amendment. Apologies to the virtual chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pittrit. Provost, are you back online? Provost? Okay, well, I carry on. It's Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. I'll just start my video.
Thank you.
With that. Okay, if that's okay. Thank you very much. It's, as usual, it's been a debate with its ups and downs. And of course, as usual, there's rabbits out of hats. Or no rabbits, as in the case of the ALBA party. But I do think that we have to take a look at how we do these things. But for the budget, I have to say the simple points are for us is that, as Councillor Ford had highlighted, it's about the choices that we make in the political priorities, the values that we hold in this democracy. And our proposal is relatively straightforward in that, and we've illustrated to you that we felt that the values of investing in education were greater than the values that were required for roads maintenance. Now, with the roads maintenance budget, we have always said that it is never permanent and that there is always a case for road safety issues. So what we are always concentrating on is to try to make sure that we continue what we should be doing, and that doesn't mean any massive decrease in the quality of what we have. It just means that we would be closer to the average rather than necessarily at the top. What also struck us was the similarity in many aspects of all of the budgets, but particularly between the partnership and the administration. We'll just make the point that while both groups have moved money around, we accept that there perhaps needs to be, maybe the new council following May and into the new one can, for the next budget process, go back and take a look at how we do it, because there are several things which are good in both, and there are several things which we would have to question in both, and there needs to be a budget process whereby the council can be more conscious of the public opinions, weigh things up, argue them out, and come to a more rational conclusions. It's a little less of the rabbit out of the hat stuff that we need, and that has been that has dogged us, if you pardon the mixed animal metaphors, over the years. So However, there are issues, of course, in the administration budget. There are things probably in there that we would support. There are things in there that we ourselves had covered already in the existing budgets, but you'll accept there are some good things. But there are also some, I suppose, when it comes to things like music tuition fees or something like that as savings, there are, the rabbits, I'm afraid, are in a minefield, and that might be difficult. All in all, I would have to contend that we want to maintain this issue of our values in education versus roads, but generally speaking, there is a lot of commonality, and that people should remember that these budgets are not 100% immutable, that they are varied, and we can work as a council. We generally can work very well together if we talk to each other a bit better, and I think that's the thing for that should be our motto for the new year. It's good to talk, and let's go forward with that. But at the moment, I cannot yet agree one or other of the budget, any other budget than the one that we've proposed. But the one that we've proposed effectively can resolve some of the issues that we have, and it speaks to our values. And if our values are investment in our young and in education, then that's what I want, and therefore I continue to move the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I believe the Provost is able to come back in. Are you there, Provost?
Apologies, we seem to have lost him again. Deputy Provost, if you wouldn't mind continuing, please. Thank you.
Could I just ask for clarification? Do I ask the Alba party to speak next?
No.
No, thank you. Leader of the Council, Councillor Kill.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. As Councillor Johnson just said, it is good to talk. You will recall that in a recent full council meeting, in a response to a question from Councillor Ford, I made the offer to all political groups, all councillors, to make suggestions for this budget. Subsequently, I received just one suggestion from the Digs for the £500,000 sustainability money, something that the administration had already decided to fund. I received no other suggestions at all. In response to Councillor Wallace, we are in a coalition administration. This requires compromise and consensus by all partners. There is no value to going into what we would have done had we had an outright majority. We don't, and we are where we are. Councillor Ford is correct about the high degree of overlap and the reason for it in the budgets. We would love to have a higher ratio of teaching staff, but Councillor Ford glossed over the reasons, rurality and so on, he said. Without the £20+ million bill for school transport, the ratio would look a lot better. I note, though, no suggestion of a 6-month holiday on roads maintenance this time around. I do agree with Councillor Everson. It would be much better if we didn't have to rely on voluntary severance, but funding is such that we do have to, and I would rather have that than compulsory job losses. Councillor Everson also makes some interesting points about the Infrastructure Fund too, and I'm pleased that having voted against its creation last year, we now have agreement of its value. The intent is to spend the extra roads money we invested last year as soon as possible. Capacity is the issue, not whether it sits in reserves or revenue. Finally, I agree with Councillor Petrie about reserves. We have spent some, around 10%, balancing last year. Remember, not all reserves can be touched at this stage, and I'll say more about the reserves a little later. I also agree with Councillor Petrie that this is not for the head of finance to provide legal advice, and Mrs Beattie should not feel bad about that. I too am uncomfortable with what was said. I was tempted for fairness and efficiency reasons to suspend standing orders, but having listened to Mrs Wild's legal advice, I think we made the right call in the end. With regards to the £3.665 million, I do look forward to hearing suggestions as to how this should be spent, and we'll speak more about that a little later. Deputy Provost, I stand by the administration's budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, are we preparing for the vote?
Yes, Provost, thank you. If you're happy for me to continue.
I think I don't have any other indications on the screen, so yes, please, just go on. And thank you, Ron, for helping out. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Provost. We have a motion and 2 amendments, and standing orders requires that we have a vote first of all between the 2 amendments. So just as a reminder, Amendment 1 is with Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Ford, to agree the report recommendations on the basis of the DIGS budget proposals, which were shown on screen and have since been circulated. Amendment 2 is with Councillor Everson, seconded by Councillor Petrie, to agree the recommendations in a report on the basis of the partnership budget proposals, which were shown on screen and also circulated. If members can please vote Amendment 1, Amendment 2, or no vote. Councillor Agnew. Councillor Aitchison.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Allen.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Argyle.
No vote.
Councillor Bailey.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Beagrie.
No vote.
Councillor Berry.
No vote.
Councillor Buse. Councillor Blackett. Councillor Bruce.
No vote.
Councillor Alan Buchan.
No vote.
Councillor Charles Buchan.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Marion Buchan.
No vote.
Councillor Calder.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Carr. Councillor Cassie.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Cox. Sorry, no vote. Councillor Davidson.
No vote.
Councillor Dickinson.
No vote.
Councillor Duncan. Councillor Durno. Councillor Everson.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Ewanson.
No vote.
Councillor Fakeley. Councillor Findlater.
No vote.
Councillor Ford.
Amendment 1.
Councillor Forsyth.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Gibb.
No vote.
Councillor Gifford.
No vote.
Councillor Harper.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Hassan.
No vote.
Provost Howitson.
No vote.
Councillor Hutchison.
No vote.
Councillor Johnston.
Amendment 1.
Councillor Keating.
No vote.
Councillor Kill.
No vote.
Councillor Cloppert.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Leslie. Councillor Mayor.
No vote.
Councillor McAllister.
Amendment 2.
Councillor McHale.
No vote.
Councillor Mollison.
No vote.
Councillor Owen.
No vote.
Councillor Partridge. Councillor Petrie.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Pike.
No vote.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Councillor Powell.
No vote.
Councillor Reid.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Reynolds.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Ross.
No vote.
Councillor Roy.
No vote.
Councillor Simpson.
No vote.
Councillor Hazel Smith.
No vote.
Councillor Norman Smith.
No vote.
Councillor Stephen Smith.
Amendment 2.
Councillor Sterling.
No vote.
Councillor Sutherland.
No vote.
Councillor Taylor.
No vote.
Councillor Topping. Councillor Walker.
No vote.
Councillor Wallace. Councillor White.
No vote.
Councillor Wilson.
No vote.
Councillor Withy.
No vote.
Thank you. Provost, I'm just going to return to those who didn't respond.
Thank you.
Councillor Agnew. Councillor Buse. Councillor Blackett. Councillor Carr.
No vote.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Durno. Councillor Fakeley.
No vote.
Thank you. Councillor Leslie. Councillor Partridge. Councillor Topping. And Councillor Wallace. I have 2 votes for Amendment 1, 15 for Amendment 2 and 30 no votes. So Amendment 2 is carried and will now be voted on alongside the motion, Provost. So I'll just go to the second vote.
Yes.
The motion being with the leader, seconded by the deputy leader, to agree the recommendations in the report on the basis of the administration budget proposals as circulated and shown on the screen. Amendment 2 is by Councillor Everson, seconded by Councillor Petrie, to agree the recommendations in the report on the basis of the partnership budget proposals. Please vote motion or amendment. Councillor Agnew. Councillor Aitchison.
Amendment.
Councillor Allen.
Amendment.
Councillor Argyle.
Motion.
Councillor Bailey.
Amendment.
Councillor Beagrie.
Motion.
Councillor Berry. Councillor Buse. Councillor Blackett. Councillor Bruce.
Motion.
Councillor Alan Buchan.
No vote.
Councillor Charles Buchan.
Amendment.
Councillor Marion Buchan.
Motion.
Councillor Calder.
Amendment.
Councillor Carr.
Motion.
Councillor Cassie.
Amendment.
Councillor Cox. Councillor Davidson.
Sorry, I didn't hear you call my name. It's John Cox here. Motion.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Davidson.
Motion.
Councillor Dickinson.
Motion.
Councillor Duncan. Councillor Dunno. Councillor Everson.
Amendment.
Councillor Ewanson.
Motion.
Councillor Fakeley.
Motion.
Councillor Findlater.
Motion.
Councillor Ford.
No vote.
Councillor Forsyth.
Amendment.
Councillor Gibb.
Motion.
Councillor Gifford.
Motion.
Councillor Harper.
Amendment.
Councillor Hassan.
Motion.
Councillor Howitson.
Motion.
Councillor Hutchison.
Motion.
Councillor Johnston.
No vote.
Councillor Keating.
Motion.
Councillor Kill.
Motion.
Councillor Cloppert.
Amendment.
Councillor Leslie. Councillor Mayor.
Motion.
Councillor McAllister.
Amendment.
Councillor McHale.
Motion.
Councillor Mollison.
Motion.
Councillor Owen.
Motion.
Councillor Partridge. Councillor Petrie.
Amendment.
Councillor Pike.
Motion.
Councillor Hall.
Motion.
Councillor Reid.
Amendment.
Councillor Reynolds.
Amendment.
Councillor Ross. Councillor Roy.
Motion.
Councillor Simpson.
Motion.
Councillor Hazel Smith.
Motion.
Councillor Norman Smith.
Motion.
Councillor Stephen Smith.
Amendment.
Councillor Stirling.
Motion.
Councillor Sutherland.
Motion.
Councillor Taylor.
Motion.
Councillor Topping. Councillor Walker.
Motion.
Councillor Wallace. Councillor White.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
No vote.
And Councillor Withy.
Motion.
Thank you, Provost. I'm just going back to those who didn't respond. Councillor Agnew. Councillor Berry.
Yeah, motion, and I will have to leave the meeting, so apologies.
Thank you. Councillor Buse. Councillor Blackett. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Dunno. Councillor Leslie. Councillor Partridge. Councillor Ross.
Motion.
Councillor Topping. And Councillor Wallace.
No vote.
Oh, sorry. Beg your pardon. Thank you. So, Provost, I have 36 votes for the motion, 15 for the amendment and 5 no votes. The motion is therefore carried and the administration budget is approved.
Thank you. That's item 4 in our papers, page 141. That's the recommendations agreed. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 5, the capital plan. This report provides the Council with information to inform the setting of the General Services Capital Plan for the period 2022-2037. Leader of the Council, please.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, members, I'm pleased to present the proposals for our capital plan covering the next 15 years. The Council's capital plan has a vital role as part of our wider medium-term financial strategy. It covers our long-term commitment to invest in buildings, land, roads, bridges and carbon reduction measures, essential for delivering our strategic priorities to our people, our economy and our environment, promoting confidence and pride in Aberdeenshire as a good place to live, work, visit and do business. We remain committed to providing the strongest foundations for success and to create an environment which will benefit Aberdeenshire for many generations to come. We recognise the ongoing challenges faced by our communities and businesses because of the pandemic and more recently the storms. So it is vital that we show leadership at this time and continue to invest in our infrastructure. Our capital plan continues to be ambitious with planned investment of nearly £1.2 billion over 15 years. That's a significant investment in our infrastructure to ensure it stands the test of time and serves our communities for many years to come. In the coming year, we are committed to the final stages of our extensive early learning childcare facilities, the energy from waste facility and the completion of the Stonehaven Flood Defence Scheme. In addition, we will continue to deliver rolling programmes, including investment in roads infrastructure, buildings, bridges and carbon reduction. Last year, I announced the delivery of 2 new primary schools in Stonehaven and Fraserburgh and affirmed our commitment to delivering the Peterhead Community Campus, Timiously. We are moving at pace to deliver these projects, and this will see an overall investment in the school estate of over £135 million. The primary school in Stonehaven is due for completion in September 2025 and Fraserburgh in October 2025, whilst we expect to see the new Peterhead Academy complete by 2026. I welcome the contributions of our local communities to help shape these facilities so that they truly reflect the needs of our communities, both now and for the future. When we set our budget in 2020, we recognised the importance of investment in infrastructure to support our residents, to live, work and move around Aberdeenshire, as well as supporting the local economy and providing the right foundations for a successful business economy. Then we agreed to invest 1.84% of the council tax increase to service an infrastructure capital fund. We also recognised in the 2021 budget the ongoing financial challenges associated with supporting and maintaining those infrastructure projects, and we chose to reserve 0.5% of any council tax rise every year for the next 10 years to provide some £13 million of capital investment each year for investment in our infrastructure. Together, Provost, these 2 infrastructure funds total a 10-year £180 million fund to tackle a significant amount of the maintenance backlog in our infrastructure. Our programme for the year ahead continues to be ambitious. However, we must recognise the very practical and real challenges we face. In a capital plan of this magnitude, we acknowledge that there has been price increases and delays to projects caused by a perfect storm of factors, including COVID-19, market recovery, increased supplier costs and a shortage of skilled labour, resulting in market volatility. This has understandably impacted on our current programme and will have a knock-on effect in future years. However, given the long-term nature of our plan, our commitment remains in place and work will continue to deliver these vital projects. We will plan and continue to focus on our objectives. In addition to the new schools and continued investment in rolling programmes, priorities for this year ahead include energy efficiency work across a range of buildings, redevelopment and upgrade of waste facilities and bin collections, investment in the upgrade of live life facilities, including outdoor physical activity space and the redevelopment of Arthur Grant Outdoor Centre, continued school improvements, including at Mearns, Mintlaw and Bankery Academies and Aboyne, Gordon and Balmedy Primaries, works to complete Banff Harbour and upgrades at Stonehaven and Macduff Lighthouse Pier, and public transport improvements. The Council is responsible for 3,500 miles of public road, carried by 1,308 bridges, which equates to one bridge approximately every 2.7 miles of road. It is currently estimated that there is a £100 million defect backlog within the Council's Bridges and Structures programme, hence the infrastructure funds that we've introduced over the last 2 years. For the year ahead, we've committed to a huge programme of improvements, including a new Guernshield Bridge, design of a new bridge at Abington, and reconstruction of 3 bridges at Gorrihy, Millcroft and Balmord, which all collapsed in storms. We have already repaired some of the Edward bridges, and other bridges are under active consideration. For the infrastructure fund, as we know how critical these bridges are in connecting communities and keeping businesses moving, and I know our residents will welcome these projects getting underway. As I said at the start, our capital plan is an essential part of our wider medium-term financial strategy, and we are committed to investing in our places and spaces to ensure our facilities are fit for purpose, our communities are connected, and our businesses can prosper, and our environment is sustainable. I believe that the capital plan before you will go a long way to achieving those ambitions. Provost, I commend the report to the Chamber, propose the recommendations on the paper and seek a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. Is there Peter Councillor Gile?
Yes, indeed, Provost. I shall very happily second the leader. Thank you very much. And I agree with what he has said about the capital plan, the capital budget that we're laying before you today. The capital plan has a fundamental role in supporting and developing a robust economy right across Aberdeenshire. And as the leader has said, strong foundations are essential to ensure that the economy does indeed develop. Environment and infrastructure services are right at the heart of the plan, with over 24 programmes and some £600 million of investment planned over the next 15 years. The programmes in the plan include implementing a new waste strategy, significant new investment in our bridges, a restatement of our commitment to improving our road network, whilst also investing in our harbours, flood prevention schemes and drainage. In addition, we continue to invest in our fleet and will do so with a focus on renewable energy over the coming years. On top of this are the infrastructure funds, which the leader has already spoken about. These new funds enable the acceleration and delivery of depot maintenance, core paths, roads and bridges projects right across our Aberdeenshire. We are committed to delivering these, not only according to the timetable set out in the plan, but also on objective criteria and prioritisation. Greatest need must always come before loudest voices or greatest influence. Yet in all of this, we must recognise the challenges we face in the coming year, and which the leader has described. They're not all of our making. They will impact on the private sector every bit as much as on the public. We and our successors in this chamber must continue to work together as much as we possibly can to overcome these challenges and continue to deliver for everyone in Aberdeenshire. Ambition always needs to be matched by pragmatism. Provost, I'm delighted to second the leader and commend this capital budget and capital plan to the Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other indications. Can we agree the capital plan?
Agreed.
Great. Thank you. And I wonder if we could suspend standing orders to deal with some of this other business. Are you happy to move on?
Yes.
Right. Council reserves, please. This report provides details of the proposed use of the Council's reserves as part of the revenue budget. Leader of the Council, please.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, the reserves set out in the report are an important strand of our medium-term financial strategy. This strategic approach gives a real demonstration of how our resources link together and can be most appropriately used. For responsible financial planning to support service delivery, it also needs to be seen in the context of a risk-aware organisation, where we have funds to fall back on in case of emergency or unexpected events. Reserves can be used in different ways. We have a working balance of £9 million, effectively a rainy day fund, to enable us to respond to unexpected events. We have other available reserves, and we have substantial earmarked reserves which are not usable for areas outside their specific intention. I continue to recognise the challenges and risks facing the Council, from weather-related challenges to inflationary and interest rate increases. As a responsible public service, we have to be ready to respond to whatever our communities need and ensure that we are aware of the financial risks that the council faces. So to have a working balance of £9 million seems appropriate and proportionate. We also use reserves for capacity building and delivering future efficiencies, such as digital transformation, or to help support the delivery of the council's priorities, such as the Tackling Poverty and Inequalities Fund. We also have reserves that are maintained to mitigate against known financial risks, such as the Insurance Fund. A late announcement by the Scottish Government saw the council receive a share of an additional £80 million of funding to support economic recovery from COVID. Aberdeenshire's share is £3.665 million. This funding will be fully committed in 2022 and 2023, supporting our businesses and low-income households, and this funding will be added to the existing Recovery and Resilience Reserve, with further detail on how this will be spent to be considered by policy committees during the next few months. A revised appendix should now be being shared. Just wait until that comes up on screen, promise.
Yes.
Hopefully you can see that now.
No, that's it. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Provost, into 2017-18, at the start of this administration's term, Audit Scotland highlighted Aberdeenshire as holding low levels of reserves as compared to the other Scottish councils. We held £42.789 million worth of reserves at that time. In February 2021, just before we set the budget last year, this had increased and the council held some £51.827 million in reserves. In that budget, we created some substantial new reserves from our one-off monies, some of which was for COVID-19. These reserves were to help over the next few years with our resilience and recovery, initially from COVID-19, but we will now add to this recent storms and other unexpected events that require us and our communities to be resilient to or recover from. After this budget, the value of reserves that the council will have at the start of the new financial year, 22-23, will be £75.755 million. That is after we have used £4.541 million to help balance the budget and transferred £3.665 million from the most recent extra monies to the Recovery and Resilience Fund, and used a further £4.854 million to balance the books from the overspend of this current concluding financial year. So as you can see, and as I said earlier in my summing up, we will have spent roughly 10% of the reserves. Provost, the figure represents an increase of 23.928 million over the February 21 position and some 32.966 million more than that held in 2017-18, when Audit Scotland flagged the low levels. Provost, this leaves the council in a healthy position with regard to reserves, despite some usage, and leaves us well prepared as we, as I'm sure we all hope we do, move into the COVID recovery phase, and also to deal with other extreme events. We can expect, I think, some significant expenditure to come, and it's right that we have these reserves. Whilst we have a strategic approach to all our council resources, including reserves, we do recognise the ever-changing needs and demands on these resources. Therefore, it is good practice that all reserves continue to be reviewed and monitored as we progress through the next financial year and reported through the appropriate committees. I'm therefore pleased to support this report with the revised appendix as shown. Provost, I move the recommendations and seek a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader. Seconder, please.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you.
Yes, and again, I'm more than happy to second the Leader of the Council. He has, in his remarks, shown how this administration has not only made judicious use of our reserves, but has also, over the Council term, built them up to meet specific challenges and needs in line with Audit Scotland's advice. What is beyond a scintilla of doubt is the extent to which the world is changing. The world of work, the environment in which we live, the climate, the world of finance, in no small part because of COVID, but also through other factors, malign or otherwise. Prudent use of our funding, careful choices when additional funding has come our way, means that we are in a better place with reserves than we were when this administration was formed in 2017. Equally, prudent use of these reserves, careful strategic choices when committing expenditure, will enable this council to continue to deliver its priorities in future years. In particular, we need to build on the recovery from COVID and adapt to the new ways of working that are upon us. We must work with our communities, with agencies and with governments to make Aberdeenshire resilient in the face of storms. We need to work with everyone to tackle the threat and the reality of climate change. In all of this vital work, our reserves will play a key role, in combination with our revenue and capital budgets and in delivering our carbon budget. They are all inextricably linked. Provost, I'm pleased to second the leader on this important report and commend our approach to the council. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Councillor Cargyle. I don't see any indications.
Yes, Provost, Councillor Ford, I have an amendment.
Right. On you go, please.
Thank you very much, Provost. And now, colleagues, I am not able to move, or will not be moving the amendment I would like to move, but I will move an alternative amendment as being within the Council's procedures. So the recommendations in front of us today determine the level of reserves. The second one, agree to maintain a minimum general fund working balance of 9 million. Now, half an hour ago, the Council voted not to agree to the Diggs proposal in our revenue budget proposal to actually have a general fund working balance of 8 million. That was our proposal, and indeed in the various revenue budget proposals before the Council, all of the groups proposed some use of reserves or change to reserves, and those decisions have been taken. So whilst, since I agreed with the revenue budget that I voted for, the Councillor Johnston proposed, I would still be happy to support a general fund working balance of 8 million, but I recognise that in order, if I was to propose that now, that the Council could only consider it by lifting standing orders, since the decision taken half an hour ago is well within the 6-month rule, and I do not propose to move a suspension of standing orders so that we can have a silly and pointless vote, which we will lose on a decision that we decided not to go with collectively only half an hour ago. So I won't move that amendment, but that is still, as it were, the Democratic, Independent and Green Group's preferred position. The amendment I will move is to request officers, or let's put it right, to recommend to officers that in future years the position on council reserves is considered as an integral part of the revenue budget report. All of the groups proposed changes to the reserves in the revenue budget, and in terms of procedure and transparency, having a paper later on the agenda to consider reserves when some of the decisions relating to reserves have already been taken, only, as it were, minutes before, seems to me foolish. There are decisions that the council might wish to take about reserves that it now, as it were, can't take without suspending standing orders because decisions have already been taken about them at this very meeting. So our amendment would be to recommend that procedural change for future years so that reserves can be considered in the same paper as the rest of the revenue budget. Each impacts on the other, and the logic is to consider them as part of the same report so we don't have this issue that we have now of, as it were, second guessing. This is not the first time the Democratic, Independent and Green Group has been faced with a reserves paper later on the agenda that it had already effectively said it didn't agree with, but is now left with either appearing to agree with or having a pointless vote that wastes everybody's time. And as I said, we don't want to do that. So procedurally, I think there is a better way of approaching this. And it's not just us as a group, by the way. I mean, all the groups made proposals about the reserves in their revenue budget proposal. So let's have it all together in a single paper in future. So that's my amendment, Provost. I seek a seconder for that, or maybe we can agree it by consensus, because this is an issue about a transparent and appropriate procedure. And I don't think taking this part of the Council's finance separately later in the agenda actually makes sense.
Do you have a seconder, please?
Yes, I would second. I can't get that. That's on second, that's Councillor Johnston. Could I just add It seems a worthwhile thought. This is one of the sort of small changes that we need to make to our procedures, which would actually lead to quicker and more agreeable decisions, etc., not where we can actually more or less get a consensus out of these things. So it really should be part of the overall main revenue budget considerations. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Johnson, I've got the Chief Executive to speak, please. Chief Executive.
Sorry, I'm just getting the camera on. Just thought it'd be worth just coming on this one. I think I understand clearly the proposal that has been made here for officers to consider it, and we're more than content to do so, pending clearly the will of the council on this one. Clearly, members will recognise that there are interdependencies with carbon and capital, not just with revenue and reserves. And so we do bring all of the papers forward for council to consider within a single meeting. Do respect the point that's been made in terms of the sequence of the papers themselves do cause some of the points that the councillors are raising here. But if members are content, again, depending on the will of the council, I think we'd need to look at the entirety in terms of how the structure of the papers are brought forward for council for the annual budget setting process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Leader of the Council, please.
Thank you, Provost, and thanks to the Chief Executive for that advice. Councillor Ford makes and Councillor Johnson makes some good points. They absolutely do. But the Chief Executive also points out how interrelated these various subjects are. I'd be interested in some legal advice, Provost, but my assumption is that we don't need to actually decide this today. That what order papers are put forward in a year's time, there is plenty of time to decide that, and any new administration and new Provost and new leader can look into that. I'm just not sure it's something we need to decide today, and something I wouldn't want to be rushed into making a decision on today if we don't have to, Provost.
Okay, Mrs. Wiles, do you want to comment on this, please?
Thank you, Provost. Yes, I think the leader's correct in as much as it's not a decision which is urgent in any way, and in fact won't be faced again until the council is next ready to set its budget. But I think there is something that's timely around a recommendation that officers look at that. That could be brought forward to Procedures Committee. But no, the leader's correct in saying that there isn't an urgency about deciding that today. But a recommendation that officers consider the sequencing, the presentation of these reports is very timely in terms of the arrival of a new council next year, and putting in place the lessons learned from this one.
Good. Okay. Leader of the Council.
Well, Provost, could I respond, please?
I'm waiting on the leader to come.
Provost.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Provost, and thanks to Mrs. Wiles for that advice. This certainly, I would have no objection to this being considered and researched. I would be happy to agree to that today, something perhaps for Procedures Committee or wherever as we go forward, but that we accepted the recommendations today. Happy to add one that it be researched, but without a decision, as it were. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Ford, please.
Yes, Provost, thank you. And look, thank you to the leader and various officers for their responses, and particularly the point the Chief Executive made, which is absolutely valid, that there are close interrelationships between other budgets and paper and reports on our agenda today, and it is difficult. A needs to come before B, but B needs to come before A, as it were. So it is difficult, and I take his point about the wider look at it. And Chief Executive, I mean, you mentioned the interrelationship between the capital budget and the carbon budget, but the interrelationship between the revenue budget and the capital budget and the carbon budget is equally important, because much of the capital spending has revenue consequences, negative or positive. So I would be very happy with the council agreeing to look at the wider issue, especially in the context of integrating the carbon budget into the revenue and capital budgets, as to how this is done in future years. I think that's sensible. I proposed the specific point that I did in my amendment because it relates to the paper in front of the council at the moment, and therefore would be a competent amendment as opposed to something dealing with something that's not in front of us at the moment. But the Chief Executive's suggestion of that wider look seems to me to be entirely appropriate and more appropriate than what I said, in fact, which was too narrow in that sense, but specific to the paper we have.
So, Councillor Ford, are you withdrawing your?
I think if we've been given, which I think we have, an assurance by the Chief Executive and Mrs. Wiles that the whole issue of how we consider the interrelated reports that are considered on budget day in the context of lessons learned and revisions to that process, and that will come to Procedures Committee or wherever it's appropriate, I would be delighted with that. I think that would help the council, and we should look at it. And I think the leader has said he's more than happy for that to happen. So if everybody's agreed that's going to happen, there probably doesn't need to be a formal amendment, but perhaps we can minute that agreement. I don't know.
Okay. Leader, yes, Leader. Jim, please. Excuse me. Yeah.
I'll stay relegated to a Chief Executive Provost. Taking the sort of will of the council on this one, far be it for me to get in the way of councils putting amendments forward. But from an officer point of view, I'd be more than content to be able to look at the whole suite of different reports and the sequencing of how they are brought to council in terms of decision making. I think Procedures Committee would be the appropriate place to go. So I'm happy to take the indication from the chamber if that you are content with that, and then just follow your lead about whether that needs to be through an amendment or just as an agreement which can be minuted. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Leader of the Council, please.
Provost, yeah, very happy to agree with that. I thank Councillor Ford for withdrawing his amendment, and I
Yes.
would happily have it minuted that the new council review this
Right.
in due process.
Excellent. Right. Okay. That's very helpful. That's item 6, page 183, as it is. 7, carbon budget 2022-2023. Councillor Taylor, please.
Yes, thank you, Provost. And I'll just start my video as well. Provost, I'm pleased to present the carbon budget for 22-23 and thank the officers for their hard work in getting us to where we are. We've had a carbon budget since 17-18, and now a number of other local authorities are following and thus recognising Aberdeenshire Council's leadership on this across Scotland. At the same time, we accept the target of a 75% reduction of carbon emissions from a 2010 baseline by 2030 and are able to monitor the steady decline. At COP26, it was clear that the public sector in Scotland need to build further capacity to support and deliver a net zero Scotland. By setting our annual budget, carbon budget, sitting alongside the revenue, capital and housing budgets, which you have already heard, and by developing a route map to 2030, Aberdeenshire Council continues to show how it is playing its part in trying to tackle the global climate change challenge. The carbon budget process allows us to be both accountable and transparent in how we are reducing our carbon footprint. This is a whole council issue, and therefore all services have a duty to consider ways in which they can reduce emissions. As part of the route map you've just heard, there will be more detailed study of a sample and investment in the many council occupied sites, offices, schools, workshops, all geared to energy efficiency. The other major user of energy, and thus carbon emissions, is our vehicles, everything from HGV, LGV, vans, cars to lawnmowers. These feasibility studies will support a greater understanding of opportunities of reducing emissions for future carbon budgets. However, we must be aware that there is no point in moving energy consumption from one monitored use to another non-monitored use. The increase in home working, and therefore home heating, instead of office working is one case in point. However, from 2022, an estimate of this figure has been made. We also have other ongoing work, often unrecognised. For example, in housing, we are in the process of installing insulation through EIS and local heat EIS. Solar PV and battery storage are all coming on stream. We have a continued rollout of LED lighting. We have the advocacy of sustainable champions. We have Climate Ready Aberdeenshire, where council work and developments may be broadcast to the wider community. I therefore move that we accept the recommendations 1.2.1 through to 1.2.7 and seek a seconder. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dickinson, please. Oh.
Thank you, Provost. I was just trying to get the camera on.
Okay.
Thank you. And I welcome the opportunity to second the motion put by Councillor Taylor. There are many challenges in addressing climate change, but also many opportunities. The carbon budget process continues to be an opportunity for Aberdeenshire Council to monitor annually what we are putting in place to reach our ambitious targets. With the addition of the route map to 2030 work currently under development, the Council has a real chance in meeting its reduction targets. The cost of doing nothing about climate change will far outweigh the cost of action. In addition to mitigating against climate change, we must also ensure we are investing in adaptation, while making certain we are becoming more resilient to the changing climate we are witnessing here already in the North East. It is important that Aberdeenshire Council demonstrates leadership in our communities. We need to engage with all councillors, our communities, businesses, partners and organisations to ensure everyone joins us on this journey. This is the best way for progress to be made. By demonstrating what the Council is doing to reduce our impact through the carbon budget, we are better at leading by example. I continue to look forward to seeing how the carbon budget process is progressing each year. This year, we're able to see its impact within the financial budgets, demonstrating how we are aligning spend with action on climate change. How we are working towards meeting our reduction targets in a more transparent and cohesive way remains very important for the Council. I would also like to thank the officers involved in creating Aberdeenshire Council's carbon budget, and I'm happy to support the recommendations. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dickinson. Thank you. Councillor Clopper, please.
Thank you, Provost. And just starting my camera as well. Thank you. I would be grateful for a few minutes, Provost, with your permission. We were the first local authority in Scotland to implement a carbon budget, as we said before, and with it we are placing as much focus on our carbon footprint as we do on our financial budgets. Like any financial budget, setting a carbon budget helps us to figure out our long-term goals and how to work towards them. And with only a limited amount of carbon emissions available in order to reach our targets of net zero, our carbon budgets ensure we don't spend carbon we actually cannot and should not spend. And it is well known that council budgets can only be effective instruments of policy implementation and transformation when they are incorporated in public participation. And how can we achieve this public participation? COSLA knows the vital role which local government plays in our aspects of decarbonisation. We all know that the climate targets cannot be reached without local government. The COSLA team worked extremely hard during COP26 to get something hugely important included in the COP26 outcomes from Glasgow. It shows under item 5 of these outcomes that the inclusion of local and regional government in the Glasgow Agreement, which were actually left out of the COP21 Paris Agreement back in 2015. This means that local government are now finally recognized at the heart of climate change of our communities. And it's a hugely important aspect that councils are recognized as ultimately placed to mitigate and take climate action, but also that the council itself recognizes this role by not working in isolation. Council budgets can only be effective instruments of policy implementation and transformation when they incorporate public participation. And today's carbon budget report highlights the success to date for Aberdeenshire Council in reducing its internal emissions annually and the plans ahead. And I congratulate the different services on their achievements so far. But we need to make a more urgent case to the public to reduce our emissions in order to get them on board with what we do and why we do it. An example is that, for instance, producing carbon emissions for our parks and green spaces to simply look nice is perhaps less acceptable these days. Outdoor spaces benefit everybody's mental and physical health, and it has now been recognized we should share these spaces with nature to provide much needed urban safe havens, promoting biodiversity and pollinators, which stands presently at 50% level since the Industrial Revolution began. In sharing our green spaces with nature, our carbon emissions will actually reduce as we work with nature rather than working against it. But we need to get everybody on board for that, for this huge big step to take. We missed an opportunity to convey the urgency when this council voted against declaring a climate emergency, and so we have ended up with a climate change declaration, similar in its aims to the one our council declared back in 2009, and that's 13 years ago. And in these extremely challenging times, the carbon budget presented today may, in relation to climate change, unlikely seem a priority to many. But by now, we need to make urgent progress getting our communities on board. So we need our council's carbon budget and the council's environmental policies beating at the heart of our communities. And life is unlikely to ever return as we knew it, with challenges ahead we could not have imagined. However, we must all take responsibility for our council to take climate action into the heart of our community in order for young people to have a world to live in while achieving net zero targets as we've set them for 2045. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Johnston, please.
And Councillor Ford also, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Provost. My particular point is relatively small, but it has a bigger implication. While we have done exceptionally well in creating the carbon budget and responding to some of the issues internally within the council, while we have done that, and indeed now that there is now a commitment to carry on and spend to fulfill the reports, the consultants' reports, etc., necessary to find where our carbon is and how much it is costing in and create the carbon abatement curve. I would just like to remind, while we're doing all of that, I'd just like to remind that the IPCC has had reports, etc., very recently, which effectively suggests that the information that provided even as late as COP26 in Glasgow is being overtaken by events that are now occurring in the natural world, and that we have reached or are at the very verge of reaching natural tipping points where we will not be able to hold back climate average temperatures to the 1.5, and indeed are more likely to hit 2 and beyond. The implications of that are huge. So the question we have to ask ourselves is what we can do. And the answer to that is lots. And while we welcome the spending reports, we need to develop quickly a strategy amongst ourselves, ones where we could get a broad degree of consensus across the council, where the items that we will agree are to ramp up our ability to deal with these things to the point where I mean, we must ask ourselves, are we doing this quickly enough? And if we can leave with that question hanging in your minds, I would be very grateful. Thank you.
Councillor Ford, please.
Provost, thank you. Can I first say a big thank you to all the officers involved in producing this report. It is a truly impressive piece of work, and I think it provides the Council with a very good basis for moving forward to address the climate emissions that the Council is responsible for. Can I also thank colleagues around the Chamber for their support for this, because it's been very noticeable. I'm the fifth person to speak on this in this debate on this paper today, and that's 5 different political affiliations, and everybody is supportive of this. And I think that is something that has stood the Council in really good stead. That there is a consensus that we are going to deal with this, that the targets were unanimously agreed by the Council, and that the support for then taking the action to deliver those targets again exists across the Chamber. And I think that's a real strength for the Council. Look, pretty much every council has got targets for reducing its emissions. The targets bits are easy. What most of them don't have, and what Aberdeenshire hasn't had, is a plan for how we're actually going to do it. But as night follows day, if you set your targets and if you meant it, you'll need to have a plan as to how you're going to deliver them. And I am absolutely delighted that the Council now has the basis of a plan. There's still some more work to be done, but the route map is being developed. We've got substantial amount of information about how it will look and what's in it. We're setting provisional carbon budgets for the year ahead, for the years ahead to 2031. I mean, you can't do that with your financial budgets, but we actually know what our totals will be, and we've got the basis of a plan for delivering on them. And all of that is extremely positive. Dealing with climate change is not optional. Councillor Johnson has just reminded us that it is an urgent crisis. It's not a long-term problem. It's an immediate problem, and we have to do it. But essentially, as a council, you can do this well, or you can do it badly, or you can fail. And the route map that the Council is developing is a clear signal that the Council does intend to do it, and to do it well. We have made public commitments to delivering on those targets. I meant them. I assume that everyone else in the Chamber meant them. And if we meant them, then what's in this paper is what we have to do to deliver them. And then while there might be some differences around the edges about quite how you do it, a rational basis for delivering on those targets is going to look very, very like what's in this report in front of us just now. So I think it's a really good thing that the Council has it. Now, I note, of course, that the carbon budget for the year ahead has a total carbon reduction emissions identified that is a shortfall relative to the annual amount that we need to reduce by on a linear basis of cuts to reach the target of the 75% by 2030. I would rather the total was higher, but the practical reality is that we can only agree measures to reduce carbon that are actually deliverable. Otherwise, we're putting things in the budget that can't be done, and we'll have the equivalent of an overspend, and that's not sensible for anybody. I am more than happy to present to support the paper and all its recommendations on the basis that while there is a shortfall for this year, recommendation 124 is delegating the responsibility for developing and delivering the feasibility studies in Appendix 4, which can put right that shortfall in future years. And that's the point about moving beyond a carbon budget that was basically a list of annual projects, which is what we've had up until now, to a strategic approach and a route map over several years, analogous to the medium-term financial strategy, a medium-term carbon strategy, where we can plan to reduce carbon emissions in the most cost-effective and sensible way possible across that period of time. So delighted to support the paper, delighted that colleagues across the Chamber of different affiliations are also happy to support the paper. Of course, I would like to be further ahead with this, but given where we were last year, the progress we've made from last year to now, in my view, was about as good as it was possible to be to get the paper we have in front of us today for a new approach that can deliver reducing our carbon emissions in line with our targets. So thank you, Provost, and I'm delighted to support the paper.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Ford. Thank you. I don't see any other indications. The paper is item 7, page 46, and it's 121 to 127. So can we agree?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay.
Thank you.
We've just 2 items left today. I'd be quite happy to move on unless colleagues want to have another break.
Break.
Carry on, please.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. Treasury Management Strategy 2022 to 23. Head of Finance, please. Excuse me. Hello. Hello.
Provost, it looks like Mrs. Beattie's in the meeting, but obviously she's not responding at the moment.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to move on to the final item and then we'll come back to that one.
Well,
apologies, Provost.
Back again.
I lost connection. I do apologise.
No, it's not a problem. Thanks. You're here. That's the main thing. So I was just going to say that this report seeks approval of the Treasury Management Strategy and Annual Investment Strategy. So over to you, please.
Thanks, Provost. So this is the Treasury Management Strategy for 22-23. This strategy is usually reported to Business Services Committee after the budget setting. However, this year the strategic leadership team recognised that the borrowing for the capital plan is an integral part of the medium-term financial strategy and revenue budget setting, and therefore agreed that the strategy should be presented to Council as part of the budget setting process. I should add that Business Services will continue to scrutinise the compliance with the strategy and will receive a 6-monthly performance report. The Treasury Management Strategy supports the Council in meeting its requirement to operate a balanced budget. This broadly means that the cash raised during this financial year will meet the cash that we expend. The Treasury Management operation is to ensure that the Council's cash flow is adequately planned, that the capital plan is funded through appropriate borrowing, that cash is available when it's needed, and that any surplus money is invested with low-risk investments. This strategy before Council today explains how this will be achieved and how the risks will be managed and monitored, thereby ensuring compliance with the Prudential Code. If I may draw members' attention to the fact that the percentage of our revenue budget required to service our borrowing costs will have increased from 6.6% in 2021 to 8.6% in 24-25. And whilst the current borrowing position remains prudent, sustainable and affordable, the report recommends that the Head of Finance undertake a review of the ongoing borrowing requirements and provide options to Business Services Committee on options to limit the impact on the revenue budget in future years as part of the wider medium-term financial strategy. Happy to take any questions, Provost.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the Head of Finance? No, I don't see any indications. Okay, Leader of the Council, please.
Thank you, Provost. As we can see from the papers, its overarching strategy is about proper governance. The Council is legally required to adhere to the Treasury Management Code of Practice and to set Treasury indicators for the next 3 years. There are a number of very sound principles in this strategy: our short-term and long-term requirements, our financial boundaries and limits, the statutory repayments of loans, and so on. It's therefore right and proper that we ask the Head of Finance to review borrowing requirements and their revenue impact in forthcoming years. As such, Provost, I move the 4 recommendations in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder?
Yes, indeed, Provost.
Councillor Argyle, thank you.
Thank you. Just get my video going. I'm very happy to second. There's nothing much I need to add really to what the leader has said, but I would just like to take this opportunity to commend 100% the work of the Finance Service and particularly of our Head of Finance, Mary Beattie. Thank you, Mary, for all your contribution and the work that you put into today's meeting. Now we've reached the end of the finance part of it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't see any indications. Can we agree the paper?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you.
Agreed.
And finally, but not least, we have a notice of motion by Councillor Petrie. Councillor Petrie, would you like to address the council, please?
Yes, thank you, Provost.
Thank you.
Can I begin by thanking you for your agreement to hear the notice of motion at what was fairly short notice. And I also welcome your statement on the situation in Ukraine at the start of this meeting as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Provost, colleagues, as we have watched the events in Ukraine unfold over the past 2 weeks, I think we've all hugged our loved ones a little longer and a little closer. As events unfold, we can see them almost in real time on our screens and the heartbreaking reality of Putin's regime's illegal invasion of Ukraine on those who live there. Last week, the council leader released a statement on the situation, and there's nothing in that statement that I disagree with. In fact, I fully support it. However, I do feel that as a council, we need to make a public statement in support of our commitment to refugees who may wish to come here. As a council, we have previously made this commitment to support the resettlement of refugees. And Katie McLean and her team have delivered on this commitment where and when possible and are a credit to this council. It is only right that we now reaffirm that commitment and express solidarity and support to the people of Ukraine. And we've seen a really strong response from this country towards those in Ukraine already, with a strong response to the Disasters Emergency Committee's Ukraine appeal, numerous collections for items that may be required by those fleeing, and we even have a retained fireman from Aberdeenshire who will travel with the Scottish Emergency Response Association to deliver much needed fire engines and PPE to Ukraine in the coming days. And this all helps, but we must still focus on where those fleeing will settle until for them to return home. In my motion, it states that we will contribute actively to a formal Ukrainian refugee resettlement programme, and it is the sincere hope of the partnership that the UK government will put such a scheme in place to help those who are having to make the unimaginable decision to flee their homes. And if that means increasing our commitment towards refugees, then so be it, because that is the right thing to do. Unfortunately, there has been ongoing confusion coming from the Home Office in terms of how they support the refugees who have had to leave Ukraine, with mixed messages around visa support in France and the helpline for those seeking refuge here costing at cost instead of being free. Appointments for visas in France are now full for weeks. There is so much more we could and should do, and the removal of visas would be an important first step. As of Monday, only around 300 Ukrainians had been granted a visa since the Russian invasion began. There are reports this morning that this has now increased to 760. But this comes at the same time as the news from the UN that over 2 million people have now fled Ukraine. We need a quicker and more humane response to this growing crisis. EU member states have waived all visa requirements for Ukrainian refugees, and I believe that we should too, but that is a decision that's out of our hands. Instead, all we can do in Aberdeenshire is stand ready to offer the support and refuge for all those displaced by this conflict, and hope that the UK government will change its policies to ensure that we can do so. For those across the chamber who may have an ear they can bend, someone they can speak to and that can influence this, please do. We can only imagine what the people of Ukraine are going through right now. Let's stop making things more difficult for those seeking refuge here. In conclusion, Provost, we hope that there is unanimous support today for our commitment to welcoming refugees and doing what we can to support those who find themselves in such heartbreaking circumstances that they are forced to flee the comfort and safety of their homes. We extend the hand of friendship to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Everson, please.
Thank you very much, Provost. When I proposed the motion in September 2015 that Aberdeenshire Council should support the resettlement of refugees, there was some scepticism across the chamber to overcome, and I was therefore so pleased that the motion passed unanimously. I hope that there is also agreement across the chamber today and that the same outcome is achieved. And I also thank the Provost for his important words at the start of this meeting today. We are today facing the biggest refugee movement of our lifetimes, and our support for those who have had to give up everything so suddenly and amid such danger is really needed. With International Women's Day just passed, we must acknowledge that it is women and children who are bravely travelling to the unknown, showing a fortitude and a resilience that they probably do not feel. And with our knowledge of the potential for gender-based violence, sexual exploitation and abuse amongst displaced women, we must not stand on the sidelines when we could offer safety. We can all be proud of the role that Aberdeenshire has played in the resettlement of New Scots since 2015. And for that, we have to give huge appreciation to all the officers involved. They have built a resettlement scheme with people at its centre. They have sought a response to every need. We need now to enable this work to go even further to meet the ever-increasing need at the moment. It is my hope that the government will appreciate what we can provide when the expertise in councils such as ours is recognised, built upon and resourced, providing a full range of support, including for the experience of trauma. It is also my hope that we will be able to do all we can individually and collectively to convince the government to set up a formal Ukrainian refugee settlement scheme based on open doors. Although many of the first wave of refugees have families and friends to go to, this is unlikely to be the case in future waves. This week, I have attended meetings with Ukrainians already living here. I have heard their distress as they have pleaded for the help we can give. I hope today we can together express our combined support and our solidarity to the Ukrainian people and contribute how we can. For instance, through the sanctions being put in place against Russia and through donating to the emergency relief funds. Let us demonstrate our friendship to the people of Ukraine. I second the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Everson. Thank you. Councillor Pike, please.
Thank you very much, Provost. The national flower of Ukraine is the sunflower, and as a simple demonstration of support, we should encourage everyone to plant and nurture sunflowers this spring. It would be good if we could see all Aberdeenshire schools partaking, as a packet of seeds is but just a few pennies, and by planting them we would actually support everything we have discussed today, but also recognise others' suffering. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson, please.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I applaud Councillor Petrie's motion and the way in which you have delivered it is an example of the way councils
We're losing you, Councillor.
Sorry, Provost, I think we've lost audio with Councillor Johnson at the moment. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. But okay, I'll see if Mr. Councillor Cassie, please.
Yeah, thank you, Provost, and thank you for your kind words in relation to Ukraine at the start of today's meeting.
Thank you very much.
We are rightly proud of the resettlement that has taken place in Aberdeenshire. There is a humanitarian crisis tidal wave coming our way. So far, 2 million people have left the Ukraine, 1 million going through Poland alone. The UN estimates this is going to be 4 million. They do want to come here. Well, not all of them, but some of them want to come here. And we should make that easy for them. Aberdeenshire is a welcoming place. I've been overwhelmed by the response from our communities, gathering items to be taken away to Ukraine for those who are in distress. We see the heartbreaking images every night of women and children crossing that border, standing in queues in the snow, sub-zero temperatures for hours. We should take them in, we should embrace them, we should bring them here to safety. To that end, I urge the UK government to sort out the issues in relation to visas. Yesterday, 300 people were turned away from Calais to go to Paris or Brussels to get the proper documents. People fleeing war zones do not carry birth certificates with them. Can we have a little bit more urgency and compassion in that regards? As I say, we have a humanitarian tidal wave coming our way, and yes, it will get here. Public opinion will ensure that the visa issue is sorted out. What I will say is we need to prepare for that wave. I have been contacted by Eastwood Refugee Aid, who are working with MEAS, who have a refugee hotel in Aberdeen. I know there are other places that will take them in as well, but we need to be prepared, because the people coming here have what's on their back, and that is it. Their life has been turned upside down and destroyed. Thank you very much, Provost.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Christ.
Provost, Councillor Ford.
Provost.
Yeah, Councillor Johnson, please.
Yes, I just noticed Councillor Ford has also asked. Yes, I had started and I was saying that I applaud Councillor Petrie's motion and the way in which it has been conducted. But one of the casualties of war, the very first casualty of war, is often truth. And just a small point, could we as a body be very careful in how we describe the conflict? It is a war, and its origins start from 1992 with the Russian invasion of the then independent Moldova. It transferred to Georgia in 2004. But as far as Ukraine is concerned, this is a re-invasion. It is just an escalation of a war that started with the invasion of the Crimea and the Donbass region in 2014. That's 8 years they've already had to suffer. So if we can be mindful of that, I 100% support the actions proposed. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Ford, please.
Yes, and Councillor Johnson said we should be careful how we describe this, and this is not a special military
Can you
operation.
speak up a bit?
Sorry?
Sorry, can you speak up a bit, please?
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Is that better, Provost?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Johnson just said that we should be careful how we describe this, and he's quite right. In the Russian propaganda machine, I believe, is describing this as a special military operation. What absolute nonsense! That we should be perfectly clear. This is the unprovoked, large-scale military invasion of a peaceful neighbouring country. Well, actually, for what reason I cannot understand, but it is a monstrous thing to have done. And over and above that large-scale, terrible action, there are countless individual human tragedies, and we've all seen the pictures of people fleeing. And the one that sticks in my mind was that the woman, who was pictured sort of, as it were, crossing a wrecked bridge with a little bag and the cat's head sticking out the top of her coat, and she'd taken the things that most mattered to her. It is really important that the UK and other countries step up and have the most welcoming position we possibly can to people who are fleeing immediate war and destruction. And I fully support the comments made by others to that end. That is what we need to do. It is important at an individual level for all the people we can help, and I fully support Councillor Petrie's motion as far as Aberdeenshire is concerned. But it's also important in the wider scale that we present a complete and stark contrast, that the compassionate and humanitarian values of the Western liberal democracies must be seen at this time. The contrast must be clear, and those values must ultimately prevail if we're to have a world that's fit to live in. So I fully support the motion. This is a terrible, terrible thing that's happened, and I'm sure all of us are distressed and horrified that in this day and age this could be going on.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Thank you very much. Councillor Topping, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Provost. Like everyone else in the council, I, and the Alba Party, will be more than happy to support Councillor Petrie's motion. very timely, as I think everyone has said. And again, thank you, Provost, for your very good and strong words at the beginning of the meeting. The atrocities that are taking place are basically unthinkable. And I think, you know, a lot of communities are doing their bit to help. And I think across Aberdeenshire, if we as a council are spreading that word, that is good. I think the one thing I would like to say, apart from all the atrocities that are helping, a lot of our communities, as we know, Provost, we have Russian people living in Aberdeenshire who reside here and work here. So I think we've got to be mindful, because I've been a wee bit concerned where people have made, I think, quite honest and genuine and heartfelt comments about the Russians. But I mean, obviously we're talking about Putin. And you even see the demonstrations in Russia with some of the Russia people who are saying, not in my name. So all I would really say is I think we've got to be mindful that there are Russian people within Aberdeenshire, within Scotland, who are just as horrified at the atrocities that are taking place. But fully support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Allen, please.
Provost, I think Councillor Allen's just indicating that she was able to return to the meeting.
Oh, I see. Sorry, right.
Councillor Kill was asking to come.
Leader of the council, please.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, it should be noted that the wording of the motion is to reaffirm the commitment. So this does refer to a commitment already made and already being carried out, as was highlighted by both Councillor Petrie and Councillor Everson. For quite some time, the Chief Executive, other officers and I have been in communication with UK government ministers, and we have offered the support of this council to accept and rehouse legitimate refugees. We have previously increased the offering, and the Chief Executive and I have discussed recently increasing again. I have no doubt this council would be happy to increase still further if that were considered appropriate. Indeed, a recent letter we sent made the point that we didn't think enough were choosing to come to Aberdeenshire. Originally, our offer was to refugees fleeing places such as Syria, then more recently fleeing the Taliban in Afghanistan. Most recently, of course, following the wholly unacceptable actions of President Putin and his military in invading a sovereign democratic country, our recent communications with the UK government have included offers to resettle refugees from the Ukraine as well. I'm sure the whole council will join me in calling for the Russian military to withdraw immediately from Ukraine and stop this senseless bloodletting that is devastating for Ukraine and causing Russia to become internationally isolated. Equally, we must recognise, as in my words of last week, that were circulated by our press teams and referred to just now by Councillor Petrie and by Councillor Topping, that by no means are all Russians supportive of their government's actions. We must be cognizant of that, especially when dealing with our local diverse communities. Provost, if the Leader of the Opposition feels it is helpful to reaffirm that which we are already doing, and I can see the benefit at this time, I'm happy to do so and support the wording of the notice of motion. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stirling, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Provost, and just a very few words from me, just to again endorse the Leader's commitment to support Councillor Petrie's notice of motion. I don't think anyone would disagree with what has been said at all. It was really just to further emphasise the work that has been taken forward by Katie McLean and her resettlement team, and Councillor Petrie made reference to that. That team have played a significant role in helping other refugees and other people who are coming here to resettle, and I think has been extremely successful in that. And there is a commitment to continue with that, to resettle vulnerable and displaced people who are fleeing the war and conflict from other countries, including Ukraine. So the service will certainly continue to work with partners and communities to provide people with the opportunity to rebuild their lives in the safety and sanctuary of Aberdeenshire, and that would include seeking out suitable and appropriate accommodation. So I don't think any of us would disagree with the motion, and indeed I'm certainly committed to supporting the housing service and the resettlement team to work as closely as possible with all the agencies and organisations to make sure we do play our part in helping those who are fleeing and in a very distressed situation. So just happy to support the notice of motion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Sterling. Thank you. I don't see any other indications, but I just was going to offer the last word to Councillor Petrie in terms of bringing this forward and what you feel about the response you've had from your colleagues.
Thank you, Provost. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the camera on here. I would just offer thanks for the cross-chamber support on this, and it is welcome to know that we all stand and remain committed towards this. And thank you for the support in that. And here's hoping that we can welcome some of those Ukrainians soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Petrie. Right. Well, that brings us to the end of this session. I just wanted, on a personal note, when I was making some notes, I did one or two things I was saying earlier on, and I'm really quite choked up by the way that you've taken these very few words. So much appreciated. Okay, I think I'll go the meeting forward to an end. I want to thank you all very much, as usual, for your interest and participation, and for this last discussion which we've had. I think we have a great room to be very proud of the way that we are approaching it and going to proceed as this moves along. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The meeting is now closed.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you.
Thank you.